The first light over a Victorian street arrived slowly, almost without intention, as though the morning itself was unsure whether it wished to be fully awake. The sky above the narrow row of brick houses shifted from deep blue to a pale, uncertain gray, and the darkness that had rested there all night began to thin and drift away. Nothing moved quickly. The street remained quiet, holding the stillness of the early hour, with only the faintest signs that a new day was beginning. Gas lamps still burned along the pavement, their soft yellow glow lingering even as daylight crept closer. They stood at regular intervals, tall and steady, casting gentle circles of light onto the damp stones below. The cobbled road, slightly uneven and worn smooth by countless footsteps and cart wheels, reflected a faint sheen of moisture from the night air. There had been no rain, only the quiet settling of dew resting lightly on every surface. The houses lining the street stood shoulder to shoulder, their brick facades darkened by age and soot. Each home looked much like the next, with narrow windows framed in white painted wood and heavy front doors that had been opened and closed thousands of times before. Curtains hung behind the glass, some drawn tightly, others just slightly parted, as though their occupants had stirred during the night and then returned to sleep. For now, all remained still. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the street itself, a church bell marked the hour. The sound was muted and slow, drifting through the morning air rather than cutting through it. The bell did not rush its work. Each tone faded gently before the next arrived, giving the listener time to notice the silence in between. When the ringing ended, the quiet returned, deeper and more settled than before. The air carried a coolness that belonged only to the earliest part of the day. It rested lightly on the skin, neither sharp nor unpleasant, but gently reminding anyone awake that the sun had not yet fully risen. Breathing felt easy and unhurried, the air clean in a way it would not remain for long once the day's work began. For now, the street belonged to the early hours alone. A single horse, drawn cart passed slowly at the far end of the road, its wheels turning with a soft, rhythmic sound against the stones. The driver sat quietly, guiding the horse with small movements, careful not to disturb the calm more than necessary. The horse itself moved patiently, its hooves lifting and settling in a steady pattern that blended into the background rather than standing apart from it. Soon, both cart and driver disappeared from view, and the street returned to stillness. At one of the houses, a thin trail of smoke began to rise from a chimney. It lifted slowly, curling into the pale sky before fading from sight. Inside, someone had risen early to light a fire, perhaps to warm the kitchen or prepare for the day ahead. The act was ordinary and unremarkable, yet it marked one of the first signs of life within the row of homes. The smoke did not hurry upward. It drifted, taking its time. The faint sound of footsteps echoed briefly from a nearby side street. They were unhurried steps belonging to someone accustomed to rising early. The sound came closer, then faded again, leaving behind only the soft hush of the morning. No voices followed, no laughter or conversation, just the quiet acknowledgement that others were awake somewhere nearby. Light continued to spread across the street, touching the upper windows first, then slowly reaching the lower floors. Brickwork that had seemed almost black in the night now showed its deep red tones. The texture of the walls became clearer, revealing small cracks and patches of repair that told quiet stories of passing years. Nothing needed to be explained aloud. The buildings themselves held their history patiently. A cat appeared briefly at the edge of the pavement, moving with careful steps and pausing often to look around. It sat for a moment, tail wrapped neatly around its feet, as though listening to the morning. After a while, it stood and slipped through a narrow gap between two houses, vanishing without sound. The street accepted its departure without change. Windows remained mostly dark, though here and there a faint glow suggested a candle or small lamp had been lit inside. Curtains shifted slightly as someone adjusted them from within, allowing a little more light to enter the room. These movements were slow and private, unseen by most, yet part of the shared rhythm of the day beginning. No one rushed. There was time. The gas lamps flickered once, then dimmed, and finally went out as the growing daylight made them unnecessary. Their absence did not change the feeling of the street so much as deepen it, allowing the morning to take over fully. Shadows softened, and edges blurred slightly, creating a gentle, even light that settled over everything equally. Somewhere nearby, a door opened quietly and then closed again. The sound was careful, respectful of the hour. Perhaps a worker heading out early or a servant stepping into the yard behind the house. The reason did not matter. The street simply absorbed the sound and returned to its calm state, unchanged and untroubled. As the sun rose a little higher, warmth began to replace the coolness in the air. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but present all the same. The morning felt steady and predictable, as though it had this same pattern countless times before. Nothing unexpected waited here. The day would unfold as it always did, one quiet moment after another. The Victorian street rested in this gentle balance between night and day, holding both at once for a short while. The silence was not empty, but full of small, ordinary details that required no attention unless one chose to notice them. And as the light continued to grow, the street remained patient, ready to carry the day forward at its own unhurried pace, without demand, without urgency, and without any need for excitement. The room is still, and the morning has not yet fully decided to begin. Pale light rests quietly along the edges of the curtains, slipping through the narrow gaps where the fabric no longer fits perfectly against the window frame. It is not bright light and not warm either, but a gentle gray that feels patient, as though it has been waiting for some time. The modest bedroom remains quiet, holding the soft shapes of furniture and the slow rhythm of sleep. The bed is simple and narrow, placed carefully against the wall to leave space for the small wooden table beside it. The mattress is firm, stuffed with horsehair that has settled unevenly over years of use. A thin blanket lies folded loosely, its surface worn smooth by countless nights. The pillow is small, covered in plain cotton, offering comfort more through familiarity than softness. Everything in the room appears used, but cared for, and nothing is wasted. Breathing is slow and steady. The sleeper remains still for a moment longer, suspended between rest and wakefulness. Outside, the sounds of the street have not yet fully arrived. There is no rush, no call to action, only the quiet passing of time. Somewhere in the distance, a faint cartwheel creaks, but even that sound feels far away, softened by the early hour. Gradually, awareness returns, not all at once, but in small pieces. The weight of the blanket becomes noticeable. The firmness of the mattress presses gently against the back. Cool air brushes the face where the blanket has slipped slightly during the night. Eyes open slowly, adjusting to the dim light without effort or hurry. There is no alarm, no sudden noise to pull the body from sleep. Waking comes naturally, as it often did in a Victorian household, guided by habit and daylight rather than clocks. The bedroom holds only what is necessary. A wooden chair stands near the wall, its legs slightly uneven, bearing marks from years of use. Clothing is folded neatly across the seat, prepared the evening before. A small washstand rests nearby, supporting a basin and pitcher, both plain and sturdy. The mirror above it reflects little detail in the low light, only soft shapes and shadows. The air in the room is cool, carrying the faint scent of soap and clean fabric. There is also a lingering hint of coal smoke from the fire downstairs, long since reduced to embers. The walls are bare, save for a single small print, faded with age, hanging slightly crooked. It is not meant to impress, only to fill an empty space. The body shifts gently beneath the covers. Movements are slow, careful not to disturb the quiet that still fills the room. Feet touch the floor, feeling the chill of the wooden boards through thin stockings. The sensation is familiar and expected, a small reminder that the day has begun. There is no resistance to it, only acceptance. For a moment, the person sits at the edge of the bed, hands resting loosely in their lap. The room feels calm and contained, as though it exists apart from the wider world, beyond its walls. Morning has not yet made demands. There is time to sit, to breathe, to let thoughts remain soft and unformed. Outside the window, the sky continues to brighten, though slowly. The sounds of the street grow just slightly more present. A distant door opens and closes. Somewhere, a voice speaks quietly, quickly fading again. These sounds drift in and out without urgency, blending into the background of the morning. The floor creaks faintly as weight shifts again. The body stretches gently, not fully, just enough to ease the stiffness left behind by sleep. There is no hurry to stand, no need to rush through these early moments. In this modest bedroom, the day begins not with excitement, but with routine. Clothing is reached for and gathered carefully. Each piece is familiar, chosen for practicality rather than comfort or style. The fabric is cool at first touch, then slowly warms. Everything is worn in, shaped by repeated use. Buttons are smooth from being fastened countless times. Seams hold steady, repaired when needed rather than replaced. The room remains quiet as dressing begins. Movements are unremarkable and steady. There is no mirror check beyond a quick glance, no concern for appearance beyond neatness. What matters is readiness, not refinement. Each small action follows the one before it, guided by habit built over years. Light now fills more of the room, softening the shadows. Dust motes drift lazily near the window, visible only for a moment before settling again. The air feels fresh, carrying the promise of a cool morning beyond the glass. Still, the bedroom remains enclosed, calm, and unchanged. The washstand waits patiently. The basin holds cold water poured the night before. Washing is brief and efficient, done without complaint. The chill is sharp at first, then quickly forgotten. A plain cloth dries the skin, folded carefully afterward, and placed back where it belongs. There is a sense of quiet order in these actions. Nothing is hurried and nothing is delayed. Time moves forward at its own pace, and the room moves with it. This bedroom has seen many mornings like this one, and it will see many more, each nearly the same, each beginning in this calm and unremarkable way. When dressing is complete, the bed is straightened. The blanket is smoothed, the pillow placed carefully at the head. The room is returned to order, ready to wait quietly until evening brings rest again. Nothing is left out of place. There is comfort in this small act of care. Standing near the door, there is a brief pause. A final glance around the room takes in the familiar shapes and muted colors. This modest bedroom has offered rest through the night and now releases its occupant gently into the day. There is no ceremony in this moment, only a quiet understanding. The door opens softly, and the sounds of the house begin to replace the silence of the room. Yet the calm remains, carried forward from these first slow moments of waking. The bedroom settles back into stillness, holding the memory of sleep until night returns once more. In a modest Victorian home, the day often began without haste, and the quiet act of washing and dressing unfolded slowly, almost unnoticed, as if time itself were moving at a gentler pace. The room was still dim, with only a pale wash of early light filtering through thin curtains, softening the edges of the furniture and resting quietly on the floor. There were no alarms, no sudden sounds, only the faint awareness that morning had arrived and that the body, rested enough, was ready to rise. A person would sit up carefully, allowing a few moments to pass before placing their feet on the cool floorboards. The chill was familiar, expected, and accepted without complaint. Nearby, a small washstand stood ready, holding a basin, a jug of water drawn the night before, a bar of plain soap, and a simple cloth. These objects were ordinary and well used. Their presence reassuring in its consistency from one day to the next. The water was poured slowly into the basin, producing a soft, hollow sound that echoed briefly in the quiet room. Steam rarely rose from it, as warm water was a small comfort that could not always be spared, especially in humbler households. The cloth was dipped in, wrung out with steady hands, and brought gently to the face. Washing was not rushed. Each motion was careful and unremarkable, as if there were no reason to hurry and no expectation of anything beyond the simple completion of the task. The face was cleaned first, then the neck and hands, the cloth moving slowly, leaving behind a faint coolness that lingered for a moment before fading. Soap was used sparingly, its scent mild and familiar, blending quietly with the smell of wood, fabric, and the faint trace of last night's fire. There was no mirror large enough to demand attention, perhaps only a small piece of glass that reflected a vague and softened image, one that did not invite judgment or concern. Hair was attended to next, brushed or combed in long, steady strokes. This was a routine learned early and repeated countless times, requiring little thought. Hair was parted neatly, gathered, smoothed, and secured in a practical style suitable for the day ahead. There was comfort in these repeated motions, in knowing exactly what came next without needing to decide. For many, washing was limited to what could be done at the basin. Full baths were rare and saved for special occasions or specific days, often involving much preparation and effort. On an ordinary morning, the basin was enough. It served its purpose quietly and efficiently, leaving the person refreshed in a modest and restrained way. Once washing was complete, the water was set aside, the cloth hung to dry, and attention turned to dressing. Clothing was laid out the night before or chosen from a small selection, kept carefully folded in drawers or on hooks. Each piece had its place and its purpose, designed more for durability and warmth than for comfort or ease. Undergarments were put on first, simple and practical, followed by stockings pulled up slowly and secured. These small actions took time, especially in the cool air of the room, and there was no sense of urgency in completing them quickly. Dressing was a process, not an interruption, and it marked the quiet transition from sleep to waking life. Shirts or blouses were buttoned carefully, one button at a time, fingers moving patiently through familiar steps. The fabric was often coarse by modern standards, but it was known and expected, softened slightly through years of wear and washing. There was a certain steadiness in how clothing settled on the body, each layer adding warmth and structure. Trousers or skirts came next, adjusted and fastened with care. Shoes were placed nearby, waiting until the final moments. They were sturdy, sometimes stiff, and required a moment of effort to put on properly. Laces were tied slowly, knots formed with practiced ease, and feet were planted firmly on the floor once more. Throughout the process, the house remained mostly silent. Other members of the household might be stirring in nearby rooms, their movements barely audible creating a shared sense of quiet activity. No one spoke much during these early moments. Words were unnecessary, and silence felt natural and unbroken. Light continued to grow slowly outside, but inside the room it remained gentle and subdued. Shadows shifted almost imperceptibly as minutes passed. The act of dressing did not change from one day to the next. And that sameness offered a sense of calm stability, as if the world were holding still just long enough for the day to begin properly. Personal belongings were gathered next, perhaps a shawl, a cap, or a coat, depending on the season. These items were checked briefly and set aside, ready for later. Nothing was forgotten, because nothing changed. Each morning followed the same quiet pattern, and memory was guided by habit rather than thought. Before leaving the room, there might be a brief pause, a moment to smooth fabric, adjust a collar, or simply stand still. This pause was not deliberate, but it happened naturally, as if the body needed a final second to acknowledge the shift from private rest to the shared hours of the day. The washstand was tidied, the basin covered or emptied, and the cloth set neatly in its place. The room returned to stillness, holding the faint traces of movement and warmth left behind. The bed remained unmade for now, waiting for later attention, while the door opened quietly and the person stepped out into the next part of the morning. Washing and dressing were complete, accomplished without fuss or reflection. They did not mark the beginning of something exciting or new, but simply continued the steady rhythm of daily life. The body was clean enough, the clothing secure, and the mind calm and untroubled. As the chapter of the morning closed, the house remained quiet, and the day stretched ahead in familiar shapes and gentle expectations. There was no need to think far beyond the next simple task, and no reason to hurry. The soft routine had done its work, easing the transition from night into day and leaving behind a sense of order, comfort, and unremarkable peace. The soft light of early morning had begun to filter gently through the thin curtains of the modest Victorian kitchen, touching the wooden floor with a pale, quiet glow. The air carried a slight chill, the lingering coolness of the night, yet reluctant to yield fully to the warmth of the rising sun. In this hushed household, the day's first tasks began slowly, with the kind of measured calm that only morning could offer. There was no rush, no pressing urgency, only the gentle rhythm of life taking its first quiet steps. In the small kitchen, the table was already set in a simple, unassuming manner. A plain wooden table, polished just enough to reflect the soft light, held a few essential items, a modest loaf of bread, still warm from the oven the previous evening, a small dish of butter, and a shallow bowl of porridge, thick and soft, its surface steaming gently into the still air. The aroma of the porridge, faintly nutty and warm, mingled with the lingering scent of bread, creating a gentle comfort that filled the room with a sense of familiarity. There was a quiet satisfaction in the simplicity of these items, an understated contentment in knowing that they would sustain the body through the morning gently and without fuss. The house itself seemed to breathe slowly in this early hour, the walls exhaling the calm of night that had passed, the floorboards creaking softly beneath careful footsteps as one moved about. The mother of the household, or perhaps the eldest daughter, moved with measured ease, her hands performing familiar motions that had been repeated countless times in countless mornings. She lifted the loaf of bread and sliced it carefully, each movement deliberate and unhurried, the knife pressing into the soft crust with a gentle resistance before giving way. The slices were placed neatly on a small wooden plate, each one slightly uneven in size, as though the hands that cut them were more concerned with care than precision. The porridge, thick and steaming, was stirred slowly with a wooden spoon, the surface rippling softly with each gentle motion. A sprinkle of salt, just enough to enhance its natural warmth, was added, and the spoon moved again in soft circles, sending tiny wisps of steam curling upward, disappearing slowly into the quiet morning air. The butter, pale and soft, was spread onto the slices of bread, melting slightly in the warmth of the kitchen, creating small golden patches that glistened faintly in the soft light. Each step was accompanied by the subtle, almost imperceptible sounds of the room, the gentle clink of wooden utensils, the soft scraping of the knife, the quiet thud of the bread as it was set upon the plate. Outside, the world was beginning to stir in its own slow manner. The faint chirping of birds reached the windows, muted and gentle, harmonizing with the quiet routine inside. Occasionally, a distant sound of a cart on cobblestones or the soft murmur of a neighbor's morning tasks could be heard, but even these carried the same deliberate calm, as though the whole town were taking its time to wake fully, unwilling to disturb the tranquility of the early hour. Inside, however, the kitchen maintained its own soft rhythm, a comforting continuity of tasks that were as much about care as about sustenance. The act of eating itself was approached with the same gentle slowness. Each mouthful of porridge was lifted with a small spoon, carried deliberately, and tasted with quiet attention. There was no hurry, no thought of the day's duties pressing upon the moment, only the quiet enjoyment of warmth and sustenance. The bread, soft and slightly sweet from the oven, was savored slowly, its texture comforting against the tongue, the faint aroma lingering with each bite. Poured from a small steaming pot, added another layer of gentle comfort, the liquid warm and soothing as it passed down the throat, leaving behind the faintly bitter scent of the leaves mingling with the bread and porridge. As the meal continued, there was a quiet contemplation in the repetition of these simple acts. Buttering a slice, stirring the porridge, lifting the spoon, all motions that had been performed countless times before. Each carrying a sense of timelessness, as though the world outside and the concerns of the day ahead were held at bay by the very ordinariness of the moment. Each bite, each motion was slow and deliberate allowing the mind to drift into the softness of the morning, attuned to the small, reassuring details of life. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of bread and porridge, the gentle touch of the wooden table, all combined to create a serene cocoon, a moment suspended quietly before the day's larger movements began. When the last mouthful had been eaten, the utensils were placed softly upon the table, the small plate set aside with the same care that had been given to its preparation. The steam from the porridge had dissipated slowly, curling upward and vanishing into the air like the fading tendrils of a dream. There was a small sense of completion, a soft acknowledgement of a task fulfilled, though it carried no urgency, no fanfare, only the quiet satisfaction of the body prepared and the spirit gently ready for the day. Outside, the sun continued its slow ascent, spilling more light through the windows, yet the calm persisted, uninterrupted, as though the morning itself preferred a gentle passage. In these quiet moments, the household seemed suspended in a soft, timeless rhythm. The breakfast had nourished not only the body, but also the mind, providing a small, comforting foundation from which the day could unfold at its own measured pace. The aroma of the meal lingered, a subtle reminder of the calm that had passed, mingling with the faint sounds of the world awakening outside, harmonizing with the quiet interior. There was no need to rush, no pressure to move beyond the simplicity of this hour, for in its very ordinariness lay a deep and soothing comfort. As the chapter of the morning meal concluded, the kitchen retained a gentle warmth. The table quietly holding the remnants of the simple sustenance that had been enjoyed. There was a softness in the light, a mildness in the air, and a serenity in the steady, unhurried passage of time. The house seemed to sigh gently, as though content with the ordinary and the calm, allowing the quiet aftertaste of breakfast to linger softly. And in this calm, gentle space, the day had begun in the gentlest possible way, leaving behind a sense of ease and readiness, perfectly suited to carry one slowly toward the next quiet chapter. The morning light had only just begun to stretch across the rooftops of the small Victorian town, soft and pale, brushing gently against the chimneys and the gabled windows of modest homes. The streets, still touched with the lingering coolness of early hours, were mostly empty, save for the occasional figure moving slowly along the cobblestones, their footsteps quiet, measured, and deliberate. A gentle mist hovered low, softening the edges of the buildings and muting the sounds of shutters closing, wheels creaking, and the distant bark of a dog far off in the town. In these early moments, the town seemed to breathe slowly, stretching and yawning like a living being, welcoming the day in a calm, unhurried manner. The narrow streets, lined with brick and timber houses, were quiet except for the faint murmur of water flowing through the gutters and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Some of the shopkeepers were already at their doors, arranging simple displays of bread, produce, or cloth, though they moved with a quiet attention, never hurried. as if to respect the gentle pace of the morning. The smell of damp earth and smoke from a few distant chimneys mingled in the air, creating a faint, comforting warmth. It was a time when the town itself seemed to hold its breath, a time for small beginnings, small movements, and small sounds. Ordinary people, wrapped in simple coats or shawls, stepped out from their homes, often with baskets or small bundles tucked under an arm. Mothers walked slowly with young children at their sides, the children dragging one foot slightly behind the other, still waking from sleep. The sound of their soft chatter mixed with the rhythmic tapping of wooden shoes against the uneven stones of the street. It was not the rush of modern life, but a gentle procession of ordinary activity, each step deliberate, each movement measured, each thought lingering on the task at hand. The errands of the morning were simple, essential, and familiar. Some carried small parcels to the market, where the shopkeepers would nod quietly in greeting, exchanging only a few words. Others went to fetch fresh bread from the baker's door, the warm smell of baked dough drifting briefly into the cool morning air. Children, often sent with a note or a small coin, moved slowly through the streets, careful not to trip over the stones, careful not to disturb the calm that hung over the town. Every step, every turn, every gentle movement seemed part of a rhythm that had existed for many years, part of a quiet, ongoing story that began each day with soft light and soft sounds. Along the lanes, shutters creaked softly as they were opened, allowing the earliest sunbeams to enter the windows and warm the rooms inside. The light touched wooden floors, casting long, gentle shadows that stretched and receded slowly as the sun climbed higher. In the quiet courtyards behind the houses, laundry hung in neat rows, swaying gently in the faint morning breeze. The cloth moved almost imperceptibly, rustling softly, adding its own whisper to the tapestry of sounds that filled the waking town. Even the animals, dogs and cats, moved with a subdued energy, sniffing along walls or stretching lazily on the cobblestones, watching the humans pass by with a quiet and patient gaze. Errands themselves were not hurried. There was a deliberate slowness to every task. The milk had to be fetched carefully from the corner stall, a young woman balancing the fragile glass bottles with steady hands, her footsteps quiet against the cobblestones. A man might carry a small bundle of firewood, arranging it neatly under his arm before moving onward, pausing occasionally to adjust the weight or to rest for a moment in the mild shade of a doorway. There was no rush, no pressing urgency. The town did not yet speak of the day's labors in loud tones or hurried motions. Everything was soft, everything deliberate, everything contained within the gentle embrace of the morning. Shops began to open slowly, their wooden signs swinging with minimal motion in the lightest of breezes. A grocer adjusted his jars of preserves, lining them in a careful row so that each label faced outward. The sound of glass lightly clinking against wood was almost imperceptible but comforting in its regularity. The baker carried trays of still warm bread, the faint aroma weaving through the open door, drifting softly along the street to mingle with the cooler scents of morning dew and damp earth. Even these small errands, these tiny interactions, were performed without hurry, as though time itself had paused to allow the town to wake with gentle precision. For those walking the streets, the act of moving from one place to another was as much about the calm and observation as about completing the task. They noticed the slight shimmer of dew on the cobblestones, the soft chirping of birds that had begun to stir in the eaves of rooftops, the faint fog that curled lazily around a lamppost not yet extinguished. Every step was measured, every pause prolonged just enough to take in the subtle changes in light, shadow, and sound. Even errands became a slow, almost meditative practice, blending necessity with the rhythm of a town that preferred quiet and gentle motion over rush and clamor. Some streets were busier than others, though busier meant only a few more steps here or there, a few more voices barely above a whisper. Shop assistants moved slowly, exchanging brief nods with familiar faces. A woman might pause to watch a child chase a small ball across the street, the motion soft and careful, laughter restrained to a gentle murmur. The day had not yet grown loud, and all who walked through it respected this quietude, carrying out small errands in a calm, considered fashion, never disturbing the soft air with sudden movements or raised voices. By mid-morning, the town began to fill more with ordinary life. But the pace remained gentle. Those running errands continued their quiet, purposeful steps, balancing bundles and coins, shifting from one task to another with minimal fuss. The sun climbed slowly, its light warming the streets, softening the chill of early morning. Shadows shortened and moved gradually along walls and sidewalks, stretching and shrinking as if in time with the slow rhythm of human movement. Even the simplest errands, the fetching of bread, the delivery of a letter, the collection of milk, seemed to carry with them a sense of unhurried meditation. A small ritual performed day after day, quietly connecting one person to another. At times, a bell might chime from the distant church tower, its sound mellow and low, echoing softly through the narrow lanes. It marked the passage of time, yet it did so gently, without urgency. The sound mingled with the soft footfalls and the faint rustle of clothing, blending into the ambient calm that defined these streets. People paused briefly to acknowledge it, a soft glance upward or a small nod, before continuing with their errands, the town continuing its slow, soothing hum of activity. Even the air itself seemed to participate in the quiet rhythm. A faint scent of fresh earth rose from the narrow garden patches, mingling with the warmth of a nearby hearth. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, curling upward in thin, unhurried streams, dissipating gradually into the morning sky. Every element, the sound of footsteps, the smell of bread, the sight of softly moving shadows, wove together into a gentle tapestry, a calm backdrop for the ordinary tasks of daily life, each task performed without hurry, without need for drama, simply as a way to mark the passage of time in a quiet and soothing way. As the morning slowly gave way to mid-morning, the streets maintained their gentle rhythm. Errands were completed with a quiet satisfaction, a soft acknowledgement of the small duties that punctuated the day. People returned home or moved onward to other modest tasks, carrying with them the calm and stillness of a town that cherished its measured pace, even as more individuals joined the quiet procession along the streets. Each step, each movement, each soft murmur contributed to a slow and continuous flow of life that seemed almost timeless. And so the quiet streets and the soft errands of the morning continued hour by hour, step by step, sound by sound. The town itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the people moving through it, a gentle inhalation and exhalation, marking time not with urgency, but with serene and patient observation. There was no hurry, no loud disturbance, no sudden interruption. Only the calm unfolding of simple actions repeated day after day, each quietly grounding the town in its gentle, habitual rhythm. By the time the morning had fully warmed the streets, the errands of early hours were mostly complete, and those who had walked slowly and deliberately returned home or prepared for the next small task of the day. The town had awakened gently, without haste or rush, leaving behind the soft echo of footsteps and the subtle traces of quiet labor. And in that lingering stillness, one could sense the comforting rhythm of life itself, simple, measured, and peaceful, settling softly into the morning, ready for the next gentle chapter of the day. The morning light had begun to settle gently across the streets, casting long, soft shadows that stretched lazily along the cobblestones. A quiet stillness lingered in the air, broken only by the occasional creak of a door swinging open or the faint sound of footsteps as people stepped carefully into the day. In the small shops that lined the street, the first stirrings of business began almost imperceptibly, as though the day itself were waking slowly from a long, restful slumber. The shopkeepers moved with a measured grace, their hands busy but never hurried, arranging wares in neat lines, dusting the wooden counters, voice, and smoothing the edges of folded fabrics. Each movement seemed deliberate, careful, and calm, almost as if the day had asked them to take their time to savor the quiet before the more active hours arrived. In the homes nearby, a similar rhythm unfolded. The sound of wooden spoons lightly tapping against the sides of pans mixed with the soft murmurs of conversation, low and unhurried, as family members spoke in gentle tones. There was no rush, no need to hurry, only the slow unfolding of the morning, punctuated by the simple, familiar tasks that had been repeated many times before. Laundry hung carefully on lines, fluttering just a little in the occasional morning breeze, while the faint scent of oats or bread began to drift from the kitchens, warm and comforting. The sunlight filtered in through the windows, illuminating the soft, worn surfaces of tables and chairs, and for a brief moment, everything seemed suspended in a quiet, almost timeless state, as if the world were still half dreaming. In the shops, each action was performed with care. A baker, standing behind a wooden counter, reached for a sack of flour letting the fine white powder drift gently into a large bowl. The motion was slow, methodical, each gesture almost meditative, as though he were not merely preparing dough, but participating in a quiet ritual that had been practiced countless times. Outside, a few passersby might pause briefly at the display of bread or small pastries, their steps soft on the cobblestones, their voices little more than whispers as they asked for a loaf or two, and then continued on their way. The pace was unhurried, the transaction small and simple, almost like a soft conversation that barely disturbed the calm of the morning air. Meanwhile, in the textile shops, fabrics of muted colors hung from wooden racks, swaying slightly with the gentle movement of the hands that touched them. A shopkeeper smoothed a piece of cloth, fingers tracing the soft texture with care, while a customer, perhaps a young mother or an older neighbor, examined it quietly, lifting it slowly to the light, considering its weight and color without urgency. The soft creak of the floorboards beneath their feet and the muted rustle of fabric were almost the only sounds, and they blended with the distant calls of birds and the occasional hum of a passing cart. Time seemed to stretch and soften, flowing like the threads they handled, and the world outside the shop doors felt distant, almost hushed in comparison to the gentle focus inside. At home, chores were carried out with equal quiet. The preparation of meals, washing of dishes, and sweeping of floors were not hurried tasks, but part of a steady, comforting rhythm that structured the day. The scent of soap and hot water mingled with the aroma of baking bread, creating a warm, soft atmosphere that seemed to wrap around everyone present. Even children, if they were awake at this early hour, moved slowly, their small steps careful, their voices soft and half mumbled as they joined in the gentle bustle. There was a sense of continuity here, of ordinary life unfolding in a steady, predictable pattern, and it was soothing in its familiarity. Each movement, each gesture, each small sound was part of a larger, calm whole that encouraged the mind to relax and the body to settle into the slow pace of the morning. As the day progressed, the sunlight shifted slightly, moving across the wooden counters and tiled floors of the shops, warming the air just enough to make it cozy, but not too bright. Shadows lengthened and softened, and a faint breeze carried the subtle smells of the city streets, mingling with the faint aroma of tea or coffee from a nearby home. The shopkeepers and household members continued their work without urgency, folding, polishing, sweeping, and arranging, as if the very act of performing these small tasks slowly and carefully helped to tether them to the peaceful rhythm of the morning. There was no clamor, no need to rush, only the steady passage of time marked by small, gentle actions. Outside, the streets remained quiet. Occasionally, a horse's hooves tapped softly against the stones, or a cart rattled faintly as it rolled along the path. But these sounds blended into the calm hum of the morning rather than disturbing it. The day was not yet full. It was still unfolding gradually, allowing each shop and household to move at its own gentle pace. The people within seemed to exist almost entirely within this soft, slow, moving bubble, aware of the world around them, but not pulled by it, content in the simplicity of the tasks at hand and the ease of the moment. By mid-morning, the rhythm had settled into a comfortable cadence. In the bakery, the kneading of dough was almost hypnotic, each push and fold steady and unhurried, accompanied by the faint warmth of the oven beginning to glow. In the homes, water gently simmered on the stove, and the quiet clink of spoons against bowls punctuated the soft murmur of conversation. Even the air seemed calm, carrying only the soft, diffuse sounds of everyday life, as though the day itself preferred a gentle unfolding rather than abrupt activity. Each shop and home was a small island of quiet productivity, a place where the ordinary, simple tasks of daily life were elevated into a soothing rhythm that required little thought beyond the present moment. As the morning drew on, there was a subtle sense of progress, though it was measured and unobtrusive. Windows were open to let in fresh air. Shelves were tidied, and preparations for later tasks were made slowly and deliberately. There was satisfaction in the completion of small things, a clean counter, neatly folded cloth, or a well-kneaded loaf of dough. These small accomplishments were not celebrated loudly. Instead, they added to the quiet sense of order and calm that filled the shops and homes, contributing to an atmosphere that was gentle, consistent, and reassuring. The day continued in this tranquil rhythm, each shop and household participating in the slow, steady unfolding of time. The sunlight continued to shift and warm the spaces, shadows moving gradually across floors and counters, marking the passage of hours in a soft, visual manner. The soft sounds of life, whispers, brushes, clinks, and footsteps blended into a comforting, almost musical background, and the people carrying out their tasks seemed to move with the gentle assurance that comes from routine and familiarity. The morning, while busy in its own quiet way, remained calm and measured, never abrupt, never loud, always slow and deliberate. And so, as the hours passed, the shops and homes remained gently alive with activity, each person moving in harmony with the quiet rhythm of the day. The ordinary work, the simple chores, and the soft gestures of daily life created a sense of comfort that was both soothing and slightly hypnotic. It was a time that asked nothing of anyone except to move slowly, to pay attention to small details, and to exist peacefully within the soft unfolding of a calm morning. In this gentle, quiet way, the day continued, carrying everyone forward softly, steadily, and almost imperceptibly until the next chapter of daily life quietly awaited, just beyond the soft glow of the morning hours. The mid-morning in a Victorian home or workshop carried with it a gentle, predictable rhythm, the sort of rhythm that, if one listened closely, could almost lull the mind into quiet contemplation. By this time, the initial stirrings of the day had settled into a comfortable, steady pace. The streets outside, while no longer empty, remained quiet, filled only with the slow clatter of wooden wheels on cobblestones, the occasional distant cry of a vendor calling out to passers-by, and the faint sound of shutters being opened to let in the soft, diffused sunlight. The air itself seemed lighter than earlier in the morning, carrying the faint aromas of fresh bread from the baker, the softened scent of wood smoke from chimneys, and the delicate floral hints from gardens tucked behind small brick walls. Inside homes, the household members moved with a deliberate calm, their motions measured and unhurried. The mid-morning tasks, though simple and ordinary, filled the hours with a quiet sense of purpose. A mother might gently sweep the kitchen floor, each stroke of the broom slow and rhythmic, sending tiny motes of dust to float lazily in the shafts of sunlight that had begun to stretch across the wooden boards. Her movements were not hurried. There was no rush, only the comforting repetition of tasks that had been done countless times before. The clinking of utensils or the faint rustle of aprons added a soft, constant background sound, almost like a gentle metronome marking the passage of time. In workshops and small shops, the mid-morning was a time for steady, focused work. Cobblers bent over their benches, the soft tap of a hammer on leather blending seamlessly with the occasional scrape of tools against worn surfaces. The work required attention, but not urgency, allowing for a meditative stillness to settle over the room. Apprentices moved quietly around the edges, fetching supplies, arranging materials, and sometimes pausing to observe the rhythm of more experienced hands at work. Their breaths were slow, their steps soft on the wooden floors, as if even their movements were part of the gentle, unspoken music of the mid-morning. Outside, in the quieter corners of the town, gardeners and laborers continued their measured routines. The steady brushing of a rake through soil, the careful trimming of hedges, or the slow, deliberate filling of water cans with cool, clear water from wells all contributed to the subtle symphony of ordinary life. The air was filled with faint, repetitive sounds, the soft squeak of a wheelbarrow over uneven ground, the quiet plop of water falling into wooden buckets, and the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a mild breeze. These sounds, though simple, carried a sense of continuity and calm, marking the hours in a way that was almost hypnotic to a listener who paid close attention. Within the homes, mid-morning tasks often included preparing small items for later meals, repairing garments, or tending to children. A child might sit quietly at a table, their small fingers tracing patterns in a piece of cloth or arranging simple wooden toys, their soft humming barely audible over the low murmur of conversation or the occasional creak of floorboards. A parent kneeling beside them would offer gentle guidance, speaking in soft tones that encouraged concentration without hurry. Each word, each motion moved slowly, as if time itself had expanded to match the deliberate pace of domestic life. In shops, shopkeepers arranged goods with careful precision, setting small objects into neat rows or polishing surfaces until they reflected the light softly, without glare. Coins and paper money exchanged hands with a deliberate calm. Customers exchanging quiet greetings rather than hurried complaints or loud demands. The shop itself seemed to breathe, its quiet hum of activity a steady background that blended with the muted sounds of the street outside. Every motion, from folding fabric to lifting a small basket, was done with consideration and care, contributing to the sense of gentle continuity that defined this part of the day. The passage of time during mid-morning is subtle, almost imperceptible, marked more by the soft change of light than by any notable event. Shadows lengthen slowly across floorboards, creeping from one corner to another in a gradual, unobtrusive way. Sunlight glints softly on glass panes, on polished wood, and on metallic surfaces, catching the eye only for a brief moment before it drifts on, leaving the scene calm and unremarkable again. Even the air seems to hold a sense of quiet endurance, carrying the faint warmth of the morning sun while still retaining a whisper of the night's coolness. Tasks continue in their gentle, repeating patterns. Laundry is folded and stacked neatly, careful hands smoothing wrinkles as if each movement were a small ritual of order. Windows may be wiped to clear away morning condensation, leaving them just transparent enough to let in the calm, diffused light without startling brightness. The scent of tea or coffee may linger, not strong or intrusive, but present enough to remind the household of the slow progression of the day. Even silence has a shape here, a comforting blanket that wraps around every ordinary action, softening edges and smoothing over abruptness. In the quieter corners of workshops or homes, individuals might pause briefly, leaning against a door frame or chair, observing the soft movements of those around them. The pauses are not moments of boredom or impatience, but rather tiny breaths within the flow of the day, intervals that allow the mind to settle, the eyes to rest, and the spirit to ease into a gentle acceptance of the steady pace. Even the ticking of a clock, though measurable, seems to participate in this calm, marking each second not as urgency, but as a quiet companion to the unhurried hours. Food preparation for the midday meal begins in subtle ways. Vegetables are sliced slowly and deliberately. Bread is set aside to rest, and the soft simmer of water on a stove or hearth is heard in the background. The smells are muted yet comforting, a hint of flour, the warmth of cooking grains, the faint earthy note of vegetables. The rhythm of these tasks is unchanging and gentle, a quiet assurance that the day proceeds as it always does, neither rushed nor forced. The mid-morning light softens in quality as it moves across the room, touching familiar surfaces with a calm, almost sleepy glow. Walls, furniture, and floors take on a slightly warmer hue, as if the day itself has inhaled slowly and is settling into its own gentle rhythm. Outside, the occasional bird may offer a brief, melodic note, but even this is soft and fleeting, quickly absorbed back into the steady hush of ordinary life. Even tasks that might seem mundane or tedious carry their own quiet satisfaction. Folding a piece of fabric evenly, sweeping a narrow strip of floor until no dust remains, or arranging small items with care. All of these actions provide a sense of accomplishment without excitement, a steady heartbeat to the day that is soothing rather than stimulating. The repetitive nature of these chores allows the mind to wander gently, thoughts flowing without urgency, drifting from one soft observation to another as the mid-morning progresses toward its later hours. The pace of activity remains steady, a calm undercurrent that threads through homes and workshops alike. Conversations are murmured, footsteps are light, and the occasional soft laughter is subdued, a gentle acknowledgement of human presence rather than a call to action. The day continues without drama, without interruption, moving slowly but predictably, offering a sense of security and constancy to anyone observing or participating in its rhythms. By the time mid-morning begins to fade, the household is fully settled into the continuum of the day. Tasks begun earlier are either complete or paused, ready to resume after a short pause for refreshment or reflection. Hands may rest for a moment, eyes may linger on a sunlit corner, and the body, warmed by gentle movement, relaxes into the comforting knowledge that the day is unfolding in a calm, measured manner. Even the smallest actions contribute to the overall serenity. A drawer closed softly, a broom returned to its corner, a tool laid neatly on a workbench. Each motion small and unobtrusive, adds to the ambient calm, reinforcing the rhythm of mid-morning in a Victorian household or workshop. There's a sense of time passing that is tangible, yet not intrusive, gentle, yet persistent, carrying the observer forward without haste or tension. As this chapter of the day draws quietly toward the pause that will precede midday, one can feel the soft accumulation of ordinary hours, each one slipping into the next like a slow flowing river. There is no excitement, no urgency, only the gentle, consistent movement of life in steady, predictable patterns. The air remains calm, the light soft, and the household continues with its quiet diligence, each moment blending seamlessly into the next. A perfect lullaby for anyone willing to simply watch, listen, and drift along with the steady hours. And so mid-morning passes, unremarkable yet comforting, slow yet full, leaving behind a sense of continuity, of calm endurance, and of ordinary life unfolding gently, like a soft sigh across a quiet room before the day proceeds further into its afternoon hours. The mid-morning sun had risen a little higher, casting a gentle, golden light across the modest rooms of the Victorian home. Outside, the streets were quiet, though not completely still, for the soft sounds of daily life carried through the air, muted by distance and the careful rhythm of the neighborhood. Inside, there was a sense of pause, a small and tranquil moment in the midst of the day's ordinary routines. This was the time for tea, a short, unhurried break, when the hands of the clock seemed to slow ever so slightly, and the day itself allowed a quiet sigh before the afternoon continued. The table was prepared simply, without fuss. A small pot of tea, gently steaming, sat in the center, surrounded by a few modest cups, each one resting patiently on a saucer. The steam rose slowly, curling in delicate, invisible ribbons, carrying a soft aroma that mingled with the subtle scent of wood and polished surfaces in the room. It was the kind of aroma that invited a deep, gentle breath, soothing the mind and offering a sense of familiarity and comfort. The light through the window, now softened by thin curtains, fell across the table in gentle stripes, highlighting the smooth surface of the cups and the quiet stillness of the moment. The family or household members moved with a deliberate slowness, taking care not to disturb the calm that had settled. A small hand reached for the teapot, lifting it just enough to pour the amber liquid into each waiting cup. The soft clink of porcelain against porcelain was the only sound, delicate and measured, adding to the gentle rhythm of the pause. There was no rush, no sense of urgency, only the slow unfolding of simple motions that had been repeated countless times, each repetition as soothing as the last. As the tea was poured, a small plate of bread or biscuits might be placed alongside the cups. Simple nourishment to accompany the brief respite. The bread, plain and lightly browned, seemed almost to absorb the warmth and calm of the room. And the biscuits, crisp yet gentle, rested quietly on their plate, waiting patiently for the hands that would lift them to lips. The act of preparing these small, unassuming elements was itself calming, a ritual of ordinary care and attention, a gentle rhythm that the eyes could follow without strain and the mind could accept without thought. Once the tea was poured and the small refreshments arranged, there was a moment to sit quietly. Chairs were drawn close to the table, and each person settled in, allowing the day to pause with them. The tea, now slightly cooler, but still warm, was lifted carefully to the lips. Each sip was deliberate, slow, and soothing, a small wave of heat that traveled gently through the body. The flavor, light and understated, seemed to carry with it the quiet strength of patience and routine, the kind of flavor that reminded one of ordinary mornings, calm streets, and the soft passage of time. Outside the window, the world continued its quiet movement. The faint sounds of distant voices, horse hooves, or the soft murmur of a street vendor drifted through the air, but they were muted by distance and by the walls of the home. The light shifted slowly, subtly, as the sun traced its slow path across the sky, casting fleeting shadows that lengthened and contracted with unhurried precision. Inside, the room felt insulated from any hurry, a tiny space where the day could rest, even briefly, while the tea continued to steam and the hands held the cups with gentle care. During this pause, conversation was minimal, spoken softly, if at all. Perhaps a comment on the weather, a quiet observation about the day so far, or a gentle remark on the simple pleasures of the moment. Words, when they came, moved slowly, almost as if the speaker were measuring each one against the stillness around them, ensuring that nothing disturbed the calm. There was no laughter that startled, no sharp intonation, only the soft, almost inaudible murmur of human presence, companionable and unobtrusive, settling into the rhythm of tea, warmth, and quiet observation. Time in this gentle interlude seemed to stretch. Minutes drifted softly into one another, uncounted and unremarkable, yet fully present. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound unhurried, blending with the low, regular breathing of those seated. The world beyond the room moved along its usual course, but within these walls, for this brief span, time itself felt slower, softer, more accommodating. Each sip of tea, each glance at the light dancing upon the polished surfaces, each gentle shift in posture was a small anchor to the present, a reminder of the simple comforts that marked the ordinary passage of a day. Even the act of finishing the tea was calm and deliberate. Cups were set back on their saucers, the remaining liquid carefully poured away or allowed to cool, and the small plates returned to their modest place. Hands lingered a moment longer, as if reluctant to disturb the fragile serenity, tracing the contours of the table or brushing crumbs gently aside. There was no urgency to resume the day's work, only a soft acknowledgement that the pause was ending, that the warmth and comfort of tea had done its quiet work, soothing bodies, calming minds, and preparing the household to return slowly and steadily to the hours ahead. The light continued its measured progress, softening in some corners and brightening others, revealing the textures of worn wood, fabric, and paper that filled the room. The aroma of tea lingered faintly, mingling with the subtle sense of the house, leaving a trace of warmth that seemed almost tangible, wrapping the occupants in a gentle cloak of calm. Even after the cups were cleared, the atmosphere remained unchanged in its quiet dignity, a testament to the enduring, unremarkable beauty of small, daily rituals. And so the short pause for tea concluded, not with any sudden announcement or energetic motion, but with a quiet sense of completion. Each movement, each sound, each breath had been slow and deliberate, allowing the mind to rest and the body to settle into the gentle rhythm of the day. The pause itself had been unremarkable in its simplicity, yet it carried with it a profound sense of calm. The kind that seeps softly into the mind and encourages the gentle drifting towards sleep, even in the middle of the day. The room, still warmed by the brief interaction, retained the echo of stillness. Chairs were pushed back carefully, the faint scent of tea lingering, the soft light continuing to filter through the window, carrying the quiet reminder that ordinary life, in its measured pace, could be deeply soothing. And as the household prepared to resume its usual tasks, there remained a lingering tranquility, a soft, slow moving current of calm, gently guiding the day forward, as if nothing urgent or hurried could ever disturb the quiet grace of these ordinary moments. And so the pause for tea, brief as it was, ended gently, leaving behind only the soft residue of warmth, routine, and the quiet assurance that the day could continue calmly, steadily, and without haste. The sun, having climbed steadily through the pale blue sky, had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting a softer, warmer light across the quiet streets of the town. In the modest homes and tidy shops of Victorian England, the rhythm of daily labor continued with a gentle steadiness, almost unnoticed by those who paused to look. After the midday meal, which had been simple and nourishing, the townspeople returned quietly to their work, moving with a calm sense of purpose that seemed to stretch and blend into the long afternoon hours. It was a time neither hurried nor lazy, a time when ordinary tasks filled the day with small, comforting sounds and motions. In the little shops along the main street, the shopkeepers arranged their goods with slow care, adjusting the display of fabrics or the stacks of neatly folded linens, smoothing corners and brushing off a trace of dust that had settled during the morning. Each movement was deliberate, measured, as though the hands themselves had learned a gentle patience through years of repetition. The creak of the wooden floorboards beneath soft leather shoes was the only notable sound, accompanied occasionally by the faint rustle of paper or the quiet tinkle of a bell as a customer or neighbor stepped across the threshold. It was a soft, unassuming kind of life where work and time merged into one long, steady hum of quiet activity. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the cobblestones slowly, and the air carried the subtle scent of baked bread from a nearby bakery, mingled with the faint, earthy aroma of gardens and the slight smokiness drifting from chimneys. People moved past each other in gentle, unhurried ways, nodding politely or offering a soft word, their voices low and even, blending with the steady rhythm of the day. Children, perhaps finished with their light chores or lessons, played in shaded corners or quietly traced patterns in the dust, their laughter soft and fleeting, like the brief sigh of a gentle breeze across the rooftops. In the homes, women continued with their afternoon work, which often involved careful sewing, tending to small gardens, or preparing items for later meals. Their movements were slow and precise, each stitch or motion flowing smoothly from one to the next, unhurried and deliberate. The sound of needle through cloth, the soft scraping of a broom, or the muted patter of water against a basin became a quiet accompaniment to the rhythm of the afternoon. These were not hurried tasks, nor were they particularly demanding, yet they filled the hours with a gentle sense of accomplishment, a feeling that the day had substance though it remained unremarkable in its ordinary continuity. Meanwhile, in the streets and lanes, laborers continued their work in the open air, each step and movement blending with the soft clatter of tools and the occasional distant call of a voice, though nothing was loud or jarring. The work carried on in an even tempo, as though time itself had slowed to match the quiet diligence of those engaged in it. The sun, now mellowing, stretched long shadows across the ground, painting the walls of brick and timber with gentle streaks of light that shifted imperceptibly as minutes passed. Each hour seemed to linger a little longer, as if aware that the rhythm of this ordinary afternoon deserved to be savored in calm, in small measured gestures. The soft light filtering through windows touched the faces of those at work, illuminating the gentle concentration with which they attended to their tasks. Eyes lowered to the cloth, to the page, or to the arrangements of simple goods, and hands followed with patient care, repeating movements learned over countless similar afternoons. Outside, a mild wind stirred the leaves, a sound barely perceptible above the quiet rhythm of domestic and street life, brushing past the windows, hinting at the coming evening, yet leaving the present stillness undisturbed. Even the birds, chirping intermittently from their perches, added only a soft, sporadic note to the ongoing hum of human routine. In some homes, a small group might gather to perform minor repairs or simple crafts, sitting around a table bathed in the soft afternoon light, the scratch of pencil on paper, the faint snip of scissors, and the subtle creak of chairs moving gently across wooden floors filled the rooms with a comforting, understated melody. Outside, the streets grew even quieter as neighbors and passers-by settled into their own steady activities, nodding in calm acknowledgement, but never interrupting the serene pace. Time passed slowly here in a manner that felt unbroken, continuous, almost as though the day itself had decided to linger, quietly attentive to the ordinary endeavors of those within its hours. In the kitchen, a gentle simmering might begin as preparations for the evening meal took shape. The soft clink of utensils, the gentle stir of a spoon, and the low warmth of the fire in the hearth blended into the ambient hush of afternoon labor. Each small motion seemed significant in its simplicity, a reminder that the day moved forward in tiny increments, in subtle, unobtrusive gestures. There was a certain satisfaction in this quiet rhythm, a soothing assurance that nothing urgent or startling would intrude, only the steady passage of ordinary time, unfolding gently as a calm river might move past the banks of a familiar landscape. As the afternoon continued, shadows lengthened further, stretching lazily across walls and floors, marking the slow advance toward evening. People worked on, neither hurried nor restless, their movements blending into a seamless, unbroken continuity of sound and motion. It was a world of quiet diligence, where each task, however minor, contributed to the simple pattern of life, and where the soft persistence of activity offered comfort and reassurance in its predictability. Even the occasional distant murmur of conversation seemed to float through the air without urgency, absorbed by the gentle expanses of streets, houses, and courtyards. Time in this hour seemed almost elastic, stretching and folding over itself as each person engaged in the unremarkable yet comforting acts of daily labor. The sun dipped a little lower, casting a mellow golden hue over rooftops and chimneys, while the distant horizon remained calm, unchanging, patiently waiting for the day to yield to evening. Every sound, from the soft steps along cobblestones to the quiet scrape of tools, contributed to a sense of continuity, a slow, reassuring heartbeat that accompanied the unfolding afternoon. It was a lull, a gentle immersion into ordinary life, where the mind could drift with the rhythm of each small, deliberate motion. By the time the later hours of the afternoon approached, there was a perceptible softening in the energy of work. Movements slowed further, as if in anticipation of the approaching evening. The warmth of the sun faded gradually, and the air took on a cooler, gentler quality. Even as work continued, it did so in a quiet, reflective way, mindful of the slow transition from day to night. There was no rush, no sudden shift, only the soft, continuous pulse of ordinary lives moving toward rest, each action blending seamlessly with the next, forming a tapestry of calm that stretched from room to street, from hand to hand, from task to task. And so the afternoon carried on gently, with each person engaged in their ordinary duties, every movement slow, deliberate, and soothing in its repetition. The day, though uneventful in the sense of drama or excitement, was full of quiet significance, a soft rhythm of work and time passing in measured, gentle steps. It was a rhythm that invited calm reflection and easing into the evening ahead, and a gentle preparation for the soft descent of night. Here, in the ordinary afternoon of Victorian life, peace and simplicity reigned, and every small action contributed to the quiet comfort of a world moving slowly, predictably, tenderly forward. The quiet hours of the late morning had slowly passed, and now the day began to take on a gentle, steady rhythm, the kind that seemed almost timeless in its predictability. In a modest Victorian home, the air carried the faint scent of warmed bread from the early morning meal, mingling softly with the lingering aroma of tea and porridge that had been consumed not long before. The sun, climbing higher in the pale sky, cast a soft, diffused light through the windows, illuminating the simple wooden furniture and the worn, familiar surfaces of the kitchen. Everything was quiet except for the gentle creaking of floorboards as someone moved slowly from one corner of the room to another, performing tasks that had become almost automatic through repetition, yet comforting in their steadiness. The preparation for the midday dinner began without rush. A woman, or perhaps a girl tasked with helping her mother, moved calmly about the kitchen, gathering the ingredients needed for the meal. Vegetables, fresh from the morning market, or perhaps dug carefully from a small backyard garden, were laid out neatly on the wooden counter. Potatoes, carrots, and turnips, with their earthy scent and slightly rough textures, rested beside a small bundle of onions, their thin, papery skins rustling softly when touched. A small knife, worn smooth from frequent use, was picked up gently and used to peel the vegetables with slow, deliberate motions, the rhythm almost hypnotic. The peeling produced quiet, soft sounds, the faint scrape of the knife against the potato skin, the occasional gentle thud as a carrot was set down on the board. A kettle of water was set on the stove, which had already been warmed by the lingering heat of the morning fires. The soft hiss and faint whistle of the stove, as it slowly began to warm, created a subtle, Continuous background sound blending seamlessly with the muted creaks and whispers of the house. There was no hurry. Time moved in gentle increments, measured by the soft ticking of a wall clock or the shifting light across the wooden floor. The warmth from the stove spread gradually, comforting and mild, touching the coolness of the stone floor and the worn wooden counters, mingling with the natural smell of wood and faint smoke from the chimney. The act of cutting and chopping the vegetables was done with care, each movement purposeful yet slow, allowing the hands to become familiar with the simple motions, as though the mind could drift peacefully along with the steady, almost musical rhythm of the work. Carrots were cut into neat, gentle rounds, potatoes into small cubes, onions sliced thinly, their subtle fragrance curling softly into the air, mingling with the warmth and the quiet light of the kitchen. The small sound of a knife against the cutting board was accompanied by the occasional faint rustle of a basket or the soft tap of a spoon settling onto a bowl. A gentle symphony of everyday life, perfectly unhurried, perfectly ordinary. A modest pot was brought from the cupboard, its slightly worn edges and faint scratches telling quiet stories of meals long past. Water was poured into the pot, the liquid making a soft, flowing sound as it met the metal. It was placed carefully on the stove, and a small pinch of salt was added, a ritual almost unnoticed, yet comforting in its familiarity. While waiting for the water to warm, attention shifted to other gentle tasks, washing the greens, setting aside small portions of herbs, or arranging the simple serving dishes with quiet deliberation. The hands moved smoothly, without abruptness, and the mind was free to wander softly, following the quiet flow of the afternoon. As the water began to show the first signs of warmth, soft steam rising and curling lazily upward, the vegetables were gradually added, each one making a subtle plop as it entered the gentle heat. The water lapped slowly against their edges, creating a muted, soothing sound, almost like a quiet lullaby. Occasionally, the wooden spoon was lifted, stirring softly in a slow, steady circle, sending gentle ripples through the surface of the water. The aroma of the cooking vegetables began to fill the room, faint and comforting, a reminder of the simple sustenance that would soon be enjoyed. The preparation was not only about the food itself, but also about the quiet movements that accompanied it. The soft brushing of crumbs from the table, and the careful wiping of the counters, the gentle arranging of chairs and plates, all of these actions were performed in the same slow, deliberate manner. The rhythm of the household, previously punctuated by the morning bustle, had now settled into a calm, continuous pulse, soft and unchanging, echoing the steady movement of time through the day. Throughout this gentle preparation, the natural world continued its quiet, unobtrusive presence. Light shifted imperceptibly through the windows, soft shadows stretching across the floor, and a gentle breeze might occasionally drift through an open sash, carrying the faint, earthy scent of nearby gardens or the distant hum of life beyond the quiet walls. Every action inside the kitchen was mirrored by the slow passage of time outside, creating a seamless connection between the inner world and the outer, between the slow work of hands and the gradual movement of the day. There was also a quiet satisfaction in the repetition, in the familiarity of each task, in the slow unfolding of the meal. Each vegetable cut, each stir of the pot, each small adjustment of a dish or bowl carried with it a soft assurance that everything was in its place, everything proceeding as it should. Nothing demanded attention beyond the present moment. The mind, free from urgency, could float gently alongside the actions, noticing the subtle changes in light, the quiet variations in sound, the warmth slowly growing in the room, all of it combining into a calm, almost meditative state. Finally, the midday dinner neared readiness. The vegetables, softened by gentle heat, released their faint aromas fully into the quiet air. The pot sat steaming quietly, small curls of vapor rising and dissipating slowly, a soft sign that the labor of preparation was nearly complete. Everything else in the kitchen remained calm and in place. The table was set simply, with no hurry, each plate and utensil aligned carefully, reflecting the quiet order of the household. Even the small sounds, the tap of a spoon, the rustle of a napkin, blended harmoniously with the faint hum of the day outside, forming a soft, consistent rhythm. And so the midday dinner was prepared, not in haste, not in excitement, but in a quiet, deliberate, and calming manner. The room itself seemed to breathe softly with the slow passage of time, the gentle warmth of the stove, the subtle fragrances, and the steady rhythm of movements. There was a serene completeness in the work, a gentle satisfaction that required no recognition, only the soft acknowledgement of the moments unfolding. In this ordinary, modest, and unhurried way, the midday meal awaited, bringing with it a sense of comfort, calm, and quiet continuity as the Victorian day continued gently onward, softly fading toward the late afternoon hours. The afternoon had settled into a gentle quiet, with the sun softening as it began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long, mellow shadows across the modest rooms of the Victorian home. The air was warm, yet not stifling, carrying with it the faint aroma of bread baking earlier, now mingled with the gentle, earthy scent of vegetables that had been simmering quietly on the hearth. In these hours, the household moved at a measured pace, as if the world outside had softened its edges, leaving only the calm rhythm of ordinary life. At the center of the home, the table was set with care, though simplicity reigned. A plain cloth, neatly ironed, covered its surface, its soft folds catching the dying light in delicate ways. A few plates, each chosen for their modest yet functional quality, held the small offerings of the midday meal. Steaming bowls of soup, lightly seasoned, gave off a comforting aroma that filled the room with a sense of nourishment and ease. Slices of coarse bread, some still warm from the oven, rested beside small portions of butter, their golden tones catching the light and inviting quiet attention. A few preserved fruits, carefully tucked into little dishes, added gentle color to the otherwise muted setting, their subtle sweetness promising a delicate pleasure without fuss. As the household members gathered around, their movements were soft and unhurried. Hands reached for plates and cups with care, and there was a sense of respect for both the food and the shared moment. Conversation, if it occurred at all, was murmured and intermittent, floating softly above the small clinks of cutlery and the gentle rustle of fabric as chairs were adjusted. It was a time to pause, a deliberate pause, after the steady tasks of the morning. No one rushed. No one sought excitement. Instead, They allowed the quiet to envelope them, savoring the calm continuity of this daily ritual. The soup, warm and simple, was lifted slowly to waiting mouths. Each spoonful offered a mild reassurance, a reminder that life, for all its routines, carried a gentle comfort in its familiarity. The vegetables were soft, having been simmered until tender, their flavors merging in a harmonious simplicity that required no thought beyond the act of eating. Bread was torn carefully, not bitten hastily, and butter spread with deliberate patience. Even the act of drinking from the modest cups was measured, allowing the liquid warmth to settle, soothing both body and mind in a rhythm as slow as the afternoon itself. Outside, the day moved with a quiet deliberation. Light shifted imperceptibly, touching the walls and furniture in changing patterns that invited gentle notice rather than urgent attention. Occasionally, a soft breeze drifted through an open window, carrying the faint scent of drying laundry, of garden herbs, and of the cool earth beyond the street. The house seemed to breathe along with its occupants. Each small sound, the clink of a spoon, the quiet scrape of a chair, blending into a soothing background, a subtle cadence that neither demanded nor disturbed. After the meal, hands were folded softly, and the remnants of the food were cleared with the same calm attention that had accompanied its preparation. There was no rush to complete the task, no sense of urgency to move on to the next chore. Plates were gathered, wiped if necessary, and replaced gently upon the shelves or counters, their surfaces catching the dimming light in quiet reflections. The hearth was tended, embers stirred just enough to maintain a gentle warmth, and the room seemed to settle into a peaceful lull, as if even the furniture itself had exhaled along with the household. With the table cleared and the warmth of the meal still lingering in the air, a brief rest followed naturally. Some lingered in their chairs, allowing the subtle heaviness of the afternoon to descend, their eyes closing softly, perhaps while their minds drifted along calm currents of memory and imagination. Others moved quietly to small corners of the home where cushions or simple benches offered a gentle support for a short pause. Feet rested lightly, shoulders relaxed, and the body, having labored in the small but steady demands of the morning, allowed itself this brief surrender to stillness. In this quiet interlude, time seemed to stretch languidly. The faint ticking of a clock in a distant room marked the hours without urgency, each tick a gentle reminder that life continued in its measured pace. Outside, shadows lengthened further, and the sounds of the street softened, occasional footsteps, the distant bark of a dog, or the rustle of leaves in a subtle evening breeze. These noises, far from being jarring, seemed to belong to the rhythm of the day, a quiet symphony that blended seamlessly with the slow exhalation of the household. Some might have taken this time to read, opening a small, familiar book with well-worn pages and letting the words pass over them without hurry, not seeking excitement or adventure, but a quiet companionship with thought and story. Others might have simply sat gazing softly toward the window, watching the faint light fade and noting in a calm way the movement of clouds or the subtle play of colors in the sky. Even the smallest observations were made slowly, deliberately, with an awareness that the quiet itself was enough, that this gentle moment carried its own satisfaction. Food, warmth, and the slow passage of time mingled in a way that was unremarkable yet deeply comforting. There was no need for haste, for noise, for sensation. Everything had settled into a predictable, soothing cadence. It was a time to simply be, to allow the body and mind to follow the soft rhythm of the household, to feel the quiet weight of the afternoon pass naturally into the cooler tones of evening. As this rest continued, soft sighs of contentment or drowsiness occasionally drifted across the room, small acknowledgments of the body's need for pause, yet always gentle and unobtrusive. The light dimmed further, settling the household into a calm amber glow, and shadows lengthened over the walls and floorboards, stretching quietly as if reluctant to leave the space unobserved. Even the air seemed to carry a softer note, warmer near the hearth, cooler near open windows, a gentle contrast that neither startled nor demanded attention. Eventually, the brief rest naturally gave way to the slow stirring of movement, small preparations for the next tasks of the day, though still unhurried, still calm. Chairs were straightened, cushions smooth, and simple arrangements made to carry the household forward without haste. The warmth from the meal lingered, a subtle comfort blending with the fading light and the quiet sounds that surrounded the home. In these hours, life in its ordinary flow revealed its subtle charm, not through excitement or spectacle, but through the gentle constancy of routine. The late afternoon in a Victorian household held a quiet, steady rhythm, a gentle continuation of the day that had already unfolded with calm and predictability. By this time, the sunlight had softened, casting long, stretching shadows across the streets and rooms, making the familiar corners and hallways seem a little warmer, a little more subdued. The air was often tinged with the soft smell of wood smoke from nearby hearths, mingled with the faint aroma of the meals that had been prepared and eaten earlier. Everything moved slowly, as if time itself had decided to take a gentle pause, allowing the ordinary tasks of the day to settle into their own measured pace. In the modest homes of the time, those who'd been occupied with morning and early afternoon duties now shifted their attention to the responsibilities that required a careful, thoughtful approach. The tasks were not urgent or demanding in a dramatic sense, but they were steady and purposeful, needing attention to small details, each action flowing into the next with a quiet sense of order. The ladies of the house perhaps might take up the simple chores of tidying the sitting room or straightening the table, moving slowly from one activity to another, their hands working in gentle, deliberate motions. The cloths would be smoothed over surfaces, small items rearranged to their proper places, and each movement was accompanied by a soft creak of floorboards, a subtle whisper of the day's passages in the kitchens. The servants or family members continued their labor with quiet efficiency. Pots and pans might be set aside after earlier cooking, utensils carefully cleaned and arranged. A gentle tap of water from the tap or the slow, rhythmic swish of a cloth across a wooden counter created a soothing background, blending with the distant sounds of the neighborhood. A horse's hooves far along the street, the muted chatter of a passerby, or the soft clatter of a wagon wheel. Each sound was distant and calm, adding a sense of gentle life to the otherwise still rooms. There was no rush, no sudden clamor, only the steady, unhurried work of maintaining the household in its quiet order. For those who had errands or small duties outside the home, the late afternoon brought a soft light that made travel easier, yet the pace remained deliberate. Walking along cobblestone streets, people might stop to exchange a quiet greeting with a neighbor or glance at the shop windows that displayed the modest goods of the day. The streets themselves were a mix of muted activity and silent spaces. Children might be playing softly on the edges of the road, their laughter gentle and intermittent, while the occasional bell of a distant church, the slow, the very measured movement of time. There was a sense of calm continuity, a reassurance that the world moved at a steady, predictable pace, and that these responsibilities, though simple, were a part of that gentle rhythm. In the households where letters or correspondence required attention, the late afternoon might be devoted to writing or reading in a calm, methodical way. Pens were held slowly, dipped into ink with careful hands, and the scratching of quills across paper was almost musical in its regularity. The mind wandered gently with the words, sometimes drifting to memories or the quiet thoughts of the day, allowing the rhythm of writing to guide a soft, reflective pace. Even the act of folding and sealing letters became a measured ritual, each movement deliberate, as though time itself encouraged a slow, mindful approach. For those involved in tending the garden or courtyard, the late afternoon brought a soft glow that made the familiar shapes of plants and flowers appear even more peaceful. The sun slanted through leaves, highlighting the gentle curves of petals or the straight lines of trimmed hedges. Hands moved slowly over soil and foliage, pulling weeds carefully, adjusting a stake for a young plant or brushing fallen leaves aside. The sound of the breeze through the branches and the occasional chirp of a bird provided a quiet soundtrack, a gentle reminder of life's ordinary, ongoing patterns. The work was simple, almost meditative, allowing a mind to wander gently while the hands remained occupied. Meanwhile, the younger members of the household might be guided to their late afternoon lessons or quiet study. Writing, arithmetic, and reading were approached with a steady, unhurried cadence. The pages turned slowly, the letters and numbers formed with care, and the voice of a tutor or parent, if present, remained calm and measured. The sound of soft footsteps across the floor or the turning of a page filled the otherwise tranquil room with a gentle life, yet never broke the stillness that made the late afternoon so restful. Time passed quietly, and there was a sense that these responsibilities, though small, were meaningful precisely because of their consistency and gentle rhythm. In the drawing rooms or parlors, those with leisure might arrange cushions, fold newspapers, or set out small items for the evening. Everything was handled softly with hands and voices, careful not to disturb the calm of the space. Even the ticking of a clock seemed slower in these hours, a gentle marking of the passage of time rather than a reminder of urgency. The world outside continued its steady movement, but inside, the house maintained a measured, quiet pace. Each responsibility, though minor, contributed to a sense of order and calm, a feeling that the day was settling gradually toward rest. As the shadows lengthened and the light softened further, the late afternoon responsibilities began to naturally conclude. Dishes might be set aside after the last tidying, tools returned to their proper places, and surfaces left smooth and undisturbed. There was no rush to finish, no sudden calls for attention, only the gentle acknowledgement that the day was winding down, that the quiet work of the household had been done with care and thoughtfulness. Even the sound of the outside world became more subdued as people returned home and the streets emptied, leaving a hushed serenity over the neighborhood. In these hours, there was also room for quiet reflection. One could pause for a moment by the window, observing the subtle changes of light as the sun lowered itself toward the horizon, the way the long shadows stretched and shifted, the soft hues of the sky deepening. There was a faint rustle of leaves in the distance, the occasional faraway murmur of a horse-drawn carriage, and the whisper of the breeze across rooftops. Each sound, each motion was gentle, measured, and comforting, reinforcing the peacefulness of this late stage of the day. The late afternoon responsibilities of a Victorian household were not tasks of excitement or urgency, but they held their own quiet significance. They were the steady, unremarkable actions that maintained the order and calm of daily life, the things that, though small, made the home a place of comfort and familiarity. Each chore, each movement, each soft sound was part of the natural flow of the day, like the turning of pages in a slowly read book or the gentle ripple of water along a calm riverbank. By the time the last tasks were complete, the household seemed to exhale softly, as if aware that the day's labors had been completed with care and calm. The quiet of the late afternoon prepared everyone for the coming evening, setting the tone for a gentle, untroubled descent into the softer hours of dusk and night. There was a deep, reassuring sense that the day had passed as it should in a steady, measured, and soothing rhythm, and that the night would follow with equal serenity. And so the late afternoon responsibilities ended gently, leaving behind a house at peace, filled with the soft echoes of ordinary life and ready to welcome the quiet, calm hours that would soon fall with the approaching night. As the afternoon drifts gently toward evening, the streets of the small Victorian neighborhood begin to quiet one soft step at a time. The bustle of midday, with the occasional clatter of a carriage wheel or the distant murmur of voices from shops and markets, gradually fades into a subdued hum that seems to stretch lazily along every narrow lane and cobbled street. The sunlight, once bright and energetic, now softens to a pale, mellow glow, brushing the tops of buildings and the edges of rooftops with a gentle warmth, as though the day itself is sighing in contented relaxation before settling into the quiet of night. Shadows lengthen, drawing long lines across the worn stones, their edges hazy and blurred, almost as if the town is stretching slowly before curling up to rest. In the modest homes lining the streets, the rhythm of daily life shifts in a manner so subtle it might almost go unnoticed, yet it is felt in the quiet lowering of shutters, the careful extinguishing of small lamps, and the soft scraping of chairs being returned to their places after an afternoon of activity. Within these rooms, families move with unhurried care, performing simple, familiar tasks that mark the gentle transition from work to rest. Women gather the few remaining scraps from meal preparations, folding cloths and straightening tables with motions that are steady, deliberate, and soothing in their simplicity. Men, if they have returned from their work outside, remove the dust and faint traces of labor from their hands, smoothing the cuffs of their sleeves and setting tools aside. A silent acknowledgement that their day's toil is complete. Even the children who have spent hours in quiet play or small errands now find themselves drawn to calm corners of the house, occupied with soft games, quiet reading, or simply watching the light slowly fade across the floorboards. The air itself seems to take part in the gentle slowing. A faint, cool breeze drifts through the open windows and carrying with it the subtle sense of earth and grass from nearby gardens, mingling with the warmer, comforting aromas of bread or stew still lingering from the midday meal. It is a quiet mixture, unremarkable yet comforting, a reminder of the day's labors and of the promise of rest to come. Occasionally, the low toll of a distant church bell marks the passage of an hour. It sounds soft and unhurried, folding easily into the steady, sleepy rhythm of the surroundings. Time here does not press or hurry. It flows slowly, measured by these gentle, familiar sounds and by the gradual dimming of daylight, which itself seems almost reluctant to leave entirely. Outside, the few remaining passersby move with a reduced energy, their steps lighter, their voices lowered to murmurs that scarcely disturb the tranquil atmosphere. The occasional cart or wagon continues along the streets, its wheels making soft, muted impressions on the cobblestones. But these sounds are sparse and spaced far apart, each one a small punctuation in the long, steady hum of the approaching evening. Animals, too, follow this rhythm. Dogs lie down in shaded corners, their breathing slow and steady, while cats, having spent the day in languid exploration, now slink quietly along fences and window sills, settling into their chosen spots, as though the world itself has grown too calm to stir against. Within the homes, the dimming light encourages a kind of reflective stillness. People speak in lower tones, if at all, choosing words carefully, letting silence fill the spaces between. The very walls of the rooms seem to absorb and mirror this calm, the muted ticking of clocks or the faint creak of floorboards blending into a backdrop of soft, continuous quiet. Candles may be lit in preparation for the evening, their flames small and steady, casting a tender glow across worn surfaces, illuminating books, teacups, or the simple tools of daily life without creating anything that could disturb the sense of repose. The warmth of these lights is gentle, encouraging the eyes to soften and the mind to slow, as if every flicker whispers that there is no urgency, no need for haste, only the simple passage of time toward the night. The sense of winding down extends to the small, almost unnoticed routines that signal the day's end. Laundry that had hung upon lines in the morning is now carefully folded and returned to cupboards. Dusting cloths are set aside, and dishes are stacked with quiet efficiency. The sound of water flowing into basins or being poured away is soft, almost musical in its repetition, a subtle rhythm that blends seamlessly with the distant, muffled sounds of other households preparing in much the same manner. In these moments, life seems distilled to its most essential, gentle motions, each one carrying the unspoken message that work is done and the world may rest. As evening advances further, the sun dips lower, painting the sky with muted shades of pink and gray, the edges of clouds blurred and feathered, fading into the approaching blue of night. The light casts long, soft reflections across windows, highlighting curtains swaying slightly in the tender breeze. Birds who have spent the day in tireless movement now settle in the trees or rooftops, their songs quiet and intermittent, fading gently as the hours progress. The sounds of the town soften almost imperceptibly, leaving only a steady, soothing undertone that seems perfectly attuned to the slowing hearts and minds of those within. In these hours, the simplicity of life feels most apparent. The ordinary, often unnoticed details of the day, the careful folding of clothes, the slow stacking of firewood, the quiet clearing of tables take on a calm significance, marking the transition between light and dark, work and rest. Nothing rushes. Nothing demands attention. Each small, gentle action is part of the natural rhythm that carries the household from wakefulness towards sleep. It is a rhythm as old as time, repeated countless times, comforting in its predictability and quietly grounding for those who move with it. As night draws closer, shadows deepen, and the remaining light fades from rooms and streets alike. The world grows quieter still, the steady cadence of small tasks softening into almost complete silence. Outside, the faint glimmer of distant lamps begins to punctuate the dim streets, small points of warmth against the encroaching dark. The air cools further, carrying with it the subtle, earthy scent of evening, hinting at rest and stillness. Even the household pets, having found comfortable spots, breathe slowly, their gentle movements adding to the rhythm of calm that pervades the home. Finally, as the day completes its slow journey toward night, there is a pervasive sense of completion and ease. Nothing remains urgent. The streets are largely empty, the distant hum of life muted and softened, and inside, families settle into quiet corners, preparing for sleep with measured, gentle movements. The mind and body, having mirrored the slow unfolding of the day, naturally begin to unwind, drawn into a state of restful attentiveness to the simple world around them. The day's warmth lingers briefly, a faint memory in the fading light, before yielding entirely to the soft embrace of evening. In this quiet, gentle space, the day has fully wound down. Time feels unhurried, measured only by the gentle fall of light, the soft ticking of clocks, the occasional distant bell, and the rhythmic, peaceful motions of those within the home. There is nothing to startle, nothing to demand thought or action, only the calm, sleepy passage of hours, moving seamlessly toward night. And in that seamless passage, one can feel the comforting certainty of rest approaching, drawing softly near, as the world itself seems to sigh and settle, ready to welcome the hush of sleep. As the day slowly leaned toward its quiet ending, the soft light of the evening began to settle over the streets of the town. The sky, once bright and full of the warm glow of midday, now faded into gentle shades of amber, muted gold, and soft, fading pink, stretching lightly across the horizon. The sun itself had dipped lower, casting long, delicate shadows across the cobbled streets and bathing the walls of modest brick houses in a tender, mellow warmth that seemed to linger just a moment longer before it too would gently vanish. The air carried a cooler touch as the heat of the day gradually softened into a delicate chill, bringing with it the faint, earthy scent of stone and soil, touched by the faint perfume of evening flowers and damp grass. People who had spent their day immersed in the quiet routines of work, errands, or simple household tasks began to move slowly toward the familiar comfort of their homes. There was no rush. Each step was deliberate, careful, and unhurried, as though the day itself had whispered a gentle invitation to linger a little longer in its softening light. The streets, which had been filled with the quiet murmur of passing carriages, the occasional clop of horses' hooves, and the soft shuffle of walking feet, now held a gentler rhythm, more intimate and subdued, almost like a whispered conversation with the fading day. The townspeople, their faces calm and relaxed after the steady work of the day, often carried small parcels, perhaps a loaf of bread, a few vegetables, or simple items gathered from the nearby market, cradled gently in their hands or tucked carefully under their arms. Children who had spent their afternoons in the mild chaos of play now walked slowly beside their parents or older siblings, their small hands swinging lightly, the soft chatter between them barely rising above the quiet hum of the evening. Occasionally, the faint giggle of a child would drift across the still air, delicate and fleeting, soon absorbed into the peaceful hush that enveloped the streets. As the sun sank closer to the horizon, the light grew softer still, brushing the edges of rooftops and chimneys with a tender, almost invisible glow. Windows caught the fading rays and reflected them back with a gentle gleam, so faint and subtle that one had to pause and notice the quiet shimmer of glass in the slowing light. The townsfolk might glance at these reflections briefly, acknowledging the simple beauty of the moment before turning their steps toward the warmth and familiarity of their homes, each one a small sanctuary awaiting their quiet return. The air itself seemed to grow more intimate in these hours. There was a delicate stillness, almost like a soft sigh passing over the streets, encouraging slower movements and quiet contemplation. The gentle rustle of leaves, stirred occasionally by a passing breeze, added a whisper of sound that mingled with the fading calls of birds returning to their nests, a calm orchestra for those returning home. Even the distant clatter of a cart on the main road seemed less intrusive, softened by the gentle evening haze and the natural slowing of the day. Families might meet each other on the streets, exchanging quiet greetings with nods or soft words. These moments were simple and understated, a gentle acknowledgement of shared space and passage of time rather than any urgent conversation. Sometimes a neighbor might pause for a few minutes, discussing the day in a hushed tone, yet the words themselves were not hurried, and the conversation often drifted into long silences, comfortable and companionable, allowing the evening to continue its unhurried rhythm without interruption. As people approached their homes, the first sense of evening preparations would begin to rise from kitchens and hearths. A faint aroma of simple meals, warm and nourishing, would drift into the streets, mingling with the cool air and creating a gentle reminder of domestic life and routine. These smells, though ordinary and unremarkable, carried a deep comfort, grounding those returning from their day's tasks in the familiarity of home and marking the transition from the soft light of the outside world into the warm, protective quiet of domestic spaces. Doors would open slowly, their hinges creaking just enough to announce a gentle return, and families would step inside, shedding outer garments, hanging coats, and setting aside small parcels of daily errands. The interiors of the homes were softly lit by fading light through the windows or the gentle flicker of early lamps, casting a mellow glow over the modest furnishings and simple decorations. Chairs and tables, plain but comforting, waited quietly for those who had carried themselves steadily through the day, offering a place to pause and rest, to feel the calm certainty of routine. The evening itself seemed to deepen gradually, stretching time in slow, almost imperceptible increments. Shadows grew longer across the floors and walls, the golden light of the sunset blending seamlessly into the subtle purples and soft grays of approaching twilight. The air inside the home took on a faint warmth, softened by the presence of the family, the quiet steps on wooden floors, and the calm sounds of small domestic chores performed gently and without hurry. The house seemed to breathe along with its inhabitants, each movement echoing softly in harmony with the natural slowing of the day. Outside, the streets became almost empty, with only a few late wanderers moving silently, their steps absorbed by the quiet ambience of the evening. Windows glimmered faintly, and the occasional flicker of candlelight or lamp provided a comforting visual rhythm against the dimming backdrop of the sky. The town, once vibrant with the steady hum of daytime activity, now rested in a calm and gentle lull, embracing the slow descent into night. Each house, each family, each individual was slowly enveloped in this quiet transition, preparing for the soft, restful hours ahead. By the time the sun had nearly disappeared, the light that lingered was a soft, muted glow, caressing rooftops and chimneys with gentle warmth before fading entirely. The air grew cooler, and the faint, subtle sounds of the evening, the whisper of leaves, the distant cooing of birds settling, the soft shuffle of footsteps became more pronounced in the stillness. It was a time for quiet reflection, for simple awareness of the gentle passage of hours, and for savoring the calming inevitability of returning home, where comfort awaited in simple routines and the quiet presence of familiar spaces. Those returning to their homes would move slowly through these final moments of evening light, letting the gentle hues and soft shadows guide their steps, allowing the quiet of the approaching night to settle around them like a warm, soft blanket. And as the doors closed softly behind each person and the streets became hushed and still, the town embraced a quiet serenity, a gentle pause between the fading light of day and the soft darkness of night, welcoming all to rest, calm, and the quiet comfort of being home. As the soft light of the late afternoon faded gradually into the mellow shades of evening, the household began to prepare for the modest supper that would gently mark the end of the day. The windows, framed by simple curtains, allowed the last warm rays of sunlight to linger on the worn wooden floors, casting faint, stretched shadows across the quiet rooms. The air was tinged with a faint mixture of the day's lingering warmth and the subtle coolness that always arrived as the sun lowered beyond the horizon. It was a time when the world seemed to slow, when the bustle of the day had settled into a calm rhythm and the household moved with deliberate, unhurried motions, as if each action had been quietly rehearsed through countless evenings before. The preparation for supper began with simple, familiar tasks that were both gentle and comforting. In the kitchen, the hearth was cleaned and carefully tended. A small fire, steadily burning, gave off a soft, golden glow, and a mild, earthy scent of wood smoke drifted lazily through the air. The sound of crackling logs was soft and intermittent, like the faint whispers of a conversation meant only for those willing to listen. Pots and pans, worn from repeated use, were gathered with care. Each movement of the hands was slow, almost meditative, and the clinking of utensils against one another blended seamlessly with the quiet hum of the evening. There was no hurry, no need for rush. The rhythm of preparation matched the gentle slowing of the day. Simple ingredients were arranged upon the work surface, modest in their abundance, but full of the quiet promise of nourishment. Vegetables, neatly peeled and washed, glimmered faintly under the soft evening light. The subtle scent of boiled roots and herbs began to mingle with the lingering warmth of the kitchen. Perhaps a small piece of meat, carefully portioned, was laid out with deliberate care, or a fresh loaf of bread, still soft and warm from the oven, was sliced slowly, the knife gliding through the tender crumb with an almost imperceptible sound. Each movement was performed with a patience that encouraged a quiet attentiveness to the simple act of feeding the family, to the small but meaningful rituals of daily life. The table, modest yet orderly, was set with care. A simple cloth, perhaps slightly faded from frequent use, covered the wooden surface. Bowls and plates, not overly ornate, were arranged with gentle symmetry. Utensils were placed deliberately, each one resting neatly beside its companion. The very act of arranging the table was a quiet exercise in mindfulness, a slow, measured attention to detail that required no words, only the silent acknowledgement of the day's rhythm. Candles were lit, their flames flickering softly, casting a warm, muted light that danced gently upon the walls, and the soft glow gave the room a sense of intimacy and calm. The subtle aroma of burning wax mixed with the faint scent of food, creating an atmosphere both grounding and soothing, as if the world itself had been hushed by the quiet anticipation of supper. As the family slowly gathered, there was a soft settling into their places, the gentle shifting of chairs against the floor, the faint rustle of clothing, and the soft murmur of quiet conversation, muted and low, as if louder words might disturb the fragile calm. The movements of each person were deliberate, slow, and measured, reflecting the quiet tiredness of the day and the satisfaction of completing one's labors. There was no hurry to speak, no urgent topics to address. Instead, each action, each soft word contributed to a feeling of peace, a gentle continuity that flowed from one moment to the next without abruptness. The meal itself was humble, yet satisfying in its simplicity. Perhaps a stew, gently simmered over the afternoon, released its warmth and subtle fragrance into the room. The tender vegetables, softened by the careful heat of the fire, gave off an aroma that was both comforting and familiar. Bread, torn slowly into small pieces, seemed to absorb the flavors of the modest spread, and each bite was taken with a quiet appreciation, not from hunger alone, but from the simple contentment of routine. The textures and smells, the warmth of the plates, the gentle hum of quiet conversation, all combined into a soft tapestry of sensory experience that invited calm and reflection. Time seemed to slow during this modest supper. The hands that passed the bread, the eyes that met across the table, and the faint sound of the fire all contributed to a soft awareness of the present moment. It was not the sort of meal that demanded excitement or dramatic attention. Instead, it offered a gentle, almost hypnotic continuity, a reassurance that life's simple patterns remained constant and dependable. The gentle clatter of utensils, the occasional quiet sip of warm broth, and the faint sigh of comfort from a chair settling into the floor all added to the slow unfolding of the evening. Outside, the world had grown quieter still. The fading light had given way to a gentle dusk, and the first faint stars began to appear in the slowly darkening sky. The soft hush of evening carried through the slightly open windows, a quiet breeze that whispered through the trees and brought a faint chill into the warm, fragrant kitchen. The sound of distant footsteps or the occasional lowing of a cow far beyond the village added subtle texture to the otherwise calm and ordered world. Everything seemed to conspire to remind the household that this was a time for gentle pause, for reflection, and for the slow winding down of the day. As the meal drew to its conclusion, the clearing of dishes was performed with the same care and deliberateness that had marked the entire evening. Bowls were rinsed, pots were set aside to cool, and the tablecloth was folded slowly, each movement soft and precise. The soft light of candles continued to flicker, casting elongated shadows that stretched and shifted across the walls as the fire continued its gentle work in the hearth. The kitchen was filled with the subtle sounds of a day gently concluding, a comforting combination of warmth, scent, and soft motion that encouraged relaxation and quiet thought. After the last bites were taken, there was a soft pause, a moment when the household lingered in the quiet aftermath of the meal. Perhaps a small word of thanks or acknowledgement was exchanged, quiet and measured, or a gentle glance toward the fading light outside reminded those present of the peacefulness of the evening. There was no rush to move on, no desire to fill the silence with noise. Instead, each individual seemed content to remain enveloped in the slow, predictable rhythm of the household, letting the gentle calm of the moment linger as long as it wished. Even as the final tasks of supper concluded, the warmth of the kitchen and the faint glow of the fire invited a slow, restful awareness. The smells of the meal, the lingering fragrance of herbs, and as the day began to settle into the quiet hours of evening, the soft light of the fading sun filtered gently through the windows, casting long, mellow shadows across the modest rooms of the Victorian household. The streets outside had grown still, and the familiar sounds of passing carriages and distant footsteps had largely faded, replaced by a soft, almost imperceptible hum of the city slowly easing into rest. Inside, the home felt warm and contained, each room a small refuge from the dimming world beyond the walls. In these calm hours, after the tasks of the day had been tended to and the evening meal had been quietly enjoyed, the family moved slowly into their gentle pastimes, each one a simple, habitual activity that filled the space with a sense of steady, comforting rhythm. It was a time when the bustle and responsibilities of daylight could be left behind, and the quieter, more reflective activities of the evening could unfold at a pace that invited restfulness. Some members of the household might settle near the hearth, where the soft flicker of the firelight warmed both the room and the spirit. Here, hands busy with the repetitive motions of knitting, sewing, or mending Fingers worked quietly over soft fabrics, the subtle rustle of cloth and the gentle click of needles, marking the passing moments in an almost hypnotic cadence. Each movement was deliberate, calm, and unhurried, drawing the mind into the quiet satisfaction of small, productive efforts. The soft scent of warmed wool or cotton mingled with the faint aroma of the hearth, and the firelight danced lazily across faces, walls, and tables, creating a pattern of light and shadow that seemed to move almost in slow time with the rhythm of the household. Elsewhere, a small group might gather around a table, each person absorbed in the slow pleasure of reading. The pages of books, often modest in size, were handled gently, the crisp yet fragile paper yielding to careful fingers, the inked letters forming quiet windows into distant times, lands, and ideas. The room was hushed except for the occasional soft exhale or the faint turning of a page, each sound blending seamlessly into the calm of the evening. The act of reading was both soothing and immersive, allowing the mind to drift slowly, guided by words that spoke softly rather than shouted, offering the gentle pull of curiosity without urgency. Some evenings were marked by the simple act of conversation, spoken in quiet tones, measured and unhurried. Words flowed calmly like a gentle stream, carrying thoughts and reflections that required no immediate response, merely the presence of listening and being heard. Topics might range from the modest observations of the day to the soft recollections of earlier times, each memory shared in a tone of gentle curiosity, accompanied by small gestures, a faint nod, or a brief smile. Even in speech, the pace was slow, allowing the mind to follow each thought without pressure, and each pause, carefully placed, added to the sense of a day winding down in orderly, comforting silence. Children, if present, often engaged in their own quiet amusements, small games played with care, drawing on imagination that moved slowly rather than rapidly. They might arrange little figurines in careful patterns or sit with a book of simple illustrations, turning each page with soft attentiveness, whispering to themselves or to each other in hushed voices that respected the stillness of the evening. Their movements and words were restrained, as though influenced by the tranquil mood surrounding them, each action measured and gentle, harmonizing with the steady cadence of the household. The act of writing letters, too, was a favored pastime during these hours. The soft scratch of quill against paper or pen on parchment was a quiet rhythm that occupied both mind and hand. Words were chosen with care, sentences formed slowly, and thoughts were allowed to linger before being committed to paper. The scent of ink, subtle and lingering, mixed with the faint warmth of the room, enhancing the sensation of quiet reflection. Each letter was a small, unhurried bridge to distant friends or family, connecting lives across space with deliberate calmness and leaving behind a sense of satisfaction in the completion of a thoughtful, gentle task. Music, when it accompanied the evening, was almost always subdued. A soft melody played on a pianoforte or a gentle hum of a song passed quietly among family members, never loud, never insistent, merely present to enrich the stillness. The notes were deliberate, stretching slowly through the room, mingling with the shadows and the hush of the settling night. Even for those who could not play, listening became an act of soft attention, A slow weaving of sound into the fabric of the evening, each phrase a gentle encouragement to rest the mind, to let the day's work dissolve into the calm of the present. Outside, the evening deepened further, the sun slipping completely below the horizon, leaving the sky a soft gradation of blues and purples. Occasionally, the faint clatter of distant hooves or the subtle creak of a gate could be heard, but these sounds, though present, were unobtrusive, absorbed by the slow rhythm of the household. The quiet rustle of leaves in a mild evening breeze might reach the windows, carrying with it a soft, almost imperceptible sense of the wider world, reminding the household of the gentle passage of time beyond their walls. As the night progressed, the pace of activity softened even more. Knitting might be set aside, books gently closed, letters folded and stored carefully. Conversations dwindled to occasional murmurs, and music, if still playing, tapered off to silence. The hearth, though still warm, burned more slowly, its light dimming gradually, creating a cocoon of comfort and serenity. The air itself seemed to slow, filled with the soft scent of fading day, perhaps mingled with the faint aroma of the evening meal still lingering from earlier hours. In these moments, the mind and body began to surrender more fully to the gentle rhythm of rest. The habitual tasks of the evening, repeated with quiet consistency, created a steady pattern, a sense of predictability that encouraged relaxation. There was no rush, no urgency, only the calm certainty that the household would continue in this manner and that each day's small, careful actions contributed to the unhurried order of life. It was a time in which the ordinary could feel extraordinary precisely because of its consistency, its calmness, and its unwavering gentleness. By the time the household finally settled into the very final hours before sleep, the soft pastimes of the evening had done their quiet work. They had drawn the day to a gentle close, providing both body and mind with the slow, measured transition from wakefulness to rest. Fingers and minds were relaxed. Hearts moved with untroubled rhythm, and the lingering warmth of lamps, fires, and soft voices had suffused the rooms with a feeling of peaceful completeness. In this way, the gentle evening pastimes carried the household slowly toward night, providing a soft, unhurried bridge from the activities of the day to the calm stillness of sleep. The hearth glimmered faintly. The faint moonlight touched the windows, and the soft hush of the evening wrapped itself around every corner of the home, leaving behind a quiet sense of satisfaction, a serene reflection on the ordinary, and a gentle invitation to drift into rest hour by hour, breath by breath, in the comforting simplicity of a Victorian night. As the fading light of the evening draped itself gently over the rooftops of the modest Victorian household, there came a quiet sense of routine, a gentle signal that the day was drawing slowly, unhurriedly to a close. Inside, the house seemed to sigh in the calm that settled over every room, as though it too knew it was time to prepare itself for the soft hours of night. The air was cooler now, carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of the outdoors, touched slightly by the lingering warmth of a day that had moved slowly, methodically, like the steady ticking of a well-worn clock, each second slipping softly into the next, almost imperceptibly. In the kitchen, the last remnants of the day's meals had been cleared away, and the surfaces were gently wiped. leaving a clean, faintly polished shine that caught the soft glow of the dim lamplight. The wood, worn smooth by years of daily use, seemed to reflect the calm itself, quiet and steady. The cook, or perhaps the housewife, moved deliberately, almost meditatively, carrying the faint, familiar sounds of clinking dishes and the soft rustle of cloth as it was folded or draped carefully across the table or counter. Even these small motions were slow and unhurried, each step deliberate, each gesture measured, a quiet rhythm that marked the transition from the day's tasks to the night's gentle stillness. In the sitting room, chairs were adjusted slightly, positioned neatly in their customary places, cushions fluffed just so, and small trinkets or books returned to shelves where they belonged. The fireplace, long since allowed to cool, radiated only the faint warmth that remained, a gentle reminder of the hearth's presence without commanding attention. The curtains, heavy and patterned, were drawn softly, falling into quiet folds that blocked the lingering light from the outside world, leaving the room in a shadowed, comfortable hush. The muffled sounds from the street beyond were distant and gentle, a soft background of muted life that did not intrude, but rather added to the quiet ambience, as if the entire world were gradually exhaling and settling into a slower, more deliberate rhythm. Throughout the house, floors were swept with steady, calm motions, the bristles of the broom whispering against the worn wood, pushing the fine dust and fragments of the day into neat little corners to be gathered and removed. Every movement was slow, almost reflective, a gentle rehearsal of a ritual repeated countless times, each action blending seamlessly into the next. The faint aroma of the wood, mingled with the remnants of baked bread or recently cooked vegetables, lingered in the air, comforting and familiar, filling each breath with a quiet sense of home and safety. Upstairs, the bedrooms awaited their nightly preparation, each space slowly adjusted into a state of readiness for sleep. Sheets and blankets were smoothed with careful hands, tucked softly at the edges, and fluffed where needed. Pillows were rotated gently, a quiet attention to comfort, ensuring that when the household's occupants finally lay down, there would be no jarring discomfort to disturb the gradual descent into rest. The light from small oil lamps or candles cast soft, dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating each motion just enough to see without rushing, without harshness. The gentle flicker seemed to mirror the slow passing of time itself, a calm reminder that night was here and there was nothing to be hurried. Small tasks continued to occupy the gentle hours before sleep. Windows were latched with quiet clicks, the sound minimal and measured, sealing the house from the cool night air that whispered faintly at the edges. Doors were closed softly, not slammed, each movement deliberate and controlled, part of the slow, unbroken rhythm that carried the household from wakefulness into calm anticipation of rest. In some rooms, garments were hung carefully, laid out for the following day, or folded and placed neatly in drawers, the faint rustle of fabric accompanying the otherwise hushed environment, adding a subtle, almost hypnotic texture to the evening's preparations. Even the smallest sounds took on a gentle weight in this time, as if each noise, however slight, was a part of the night's own careful, measured heartbeat. The scrape of a chair being nudged softly into place, the faint squeak of a floorboard under careful steps, the whisper of fabric as it was folded, all of it blended into a calming symphony of domestic order, soothing in its predictability, gentle in its pace. There were no sudden bursts of sound, no hurried movements, only the slow, methodical attention to every corner, every surface, every item that made up the quiet world within these walls. The occupants themselves moved with a softened energy, mindful of the day's end and the need to transition from activity to stillness. Conversations, if they occurred at all, were muted and calm, spoken in low, gentle tones, words drawn out softly, each syllable lingering just enough to ease the mind rather than stir it. Laughter, if it came, was brief and subtle, fading quickly into the surrounding quiet, leaving only the steady, serene backdrop of domestic life winding down, preparing for the gentle embrace of sleep. Candles were trimmed and set carefully in their holders, the small, warm glow touching only the immediate surroundings, allowing the majority of each room to fall into soft shadows. The flickering light cast gentle patterns that danced slowly along the walls, a tranquil spectacle for anyone who chose to watch for a few quiet moments. Smoke from the lamps, thin and wispy, mingled with the faint scents of the evening, adding another layer of gentle familiarity to the night's preparation. Each movement and each sound, from the careful extinguishing of a candle to the final brush of a broom, was slow, deliberate, and soothing, a final orchestration of order before rest. By the time the final tasks were complete, the house felt settled, almost breathing in its calmness. The weight of the day softly lifted, leaving only the gentle hum of quiet life within walls that had been carefully attended to. The rooms were orderly, the surfaces clear, the beds prepared, and the lamps casting their subdued light where needed. Even the shadows seemed heavier with serenity, stretching across the corners in a measured, unhurried manner, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the peace of the household. Outside, night had fully arrived. The air was cooler and still, carrying the distant sound of a lone carriage or the faint echo of a dog's bark, each noise softened by distance and the thick, calm cloak of darkness. Windows glowed faintly from within, hints of warm light behind the drawn curtains, offering comfort against the quiet, expansive night. The streets, now mostly empty, seemed to exhale slowly, leaving the house to its tranquility, allowing the final preparations to settle into a lasting calm that would linger until morning. As the household finally retreated from the lingering tasks, moving toward bedrooms and the promise of sleep, there remained a gentle sense of satisfaction, not hurried, not accomplished with urgency, but complete in its quiet, unremarkable way. Chairs and tables were in their places, linens and garments neatly arranged, the floors brushed and cleared, and the air imbued with the subtle scents of the day, faintly sweet, faintly earthy, all melding into a comforting backdrop for rest. And so the house, having been carefully prepared for the night, seemed to exhale one final time, a quiet release that settled into every corner, every shadowed nook, every gently polished surface. The quiet was deep, steady, and comforting, the perfect companion to those who would soon lie down, letting the soft weight of sleep descend slowly, unhurriedly, as the world outside faded into the calm, gentle darkness of a Victorian night. In these moments, there was nothing to startle, nothing to interrupt, only the patient, soothing rhythm of preparation complete, of a home ready to rest, and of a night that promised quiet, slow passage into dreams, carrying every soul gently along its calm, steady current. The house had grown quiet, and the gentle shadows of the evening had settled into every corner. The dim glow of the remaining candlelight flickered softly against the walls, stretching long, lazy shadows across the worn wooden floors. Outside, the air had grown cooler, carrying the subtle fragrance of damp earth and distant flowers from the garden, which seemed to pause in its own quiet rhythm, as if respecting the stillness within. The ordinary noises of the day, footsteps, the clatter of dishes, the faint hum of conversation, had all dwindled, leaving only the whisper of time passing and the soft creaks of the old house as it slowly shifted with the settling of the night. In the bedrooms, heavy curtains were drawn gently across the windows, muffling the faint sounds of distant carriages on cobblestone streets and the occasional footsteps of someone returning from an errand. Each room held its own calmness, a gentle retreat from the bustle that had carried the household from morning to evening. The beds, neatly arranged with thick quilts and soft blankets, waited patiently for their occupants, their presence inviting the weary bodies of those who had labored and moved through the long hours of the day to lie down and rest. The pillows, plump yet firm, seemed to embrace the quiet in their own way, forming a small, cozy nest in which the mind and body could gradually unwind. As the household settled into the hour before sleep, people moved with a deliberate slowness, their gestures softened by fatigue and the calm of the evening. Children, their faces still tinged with the gentle flush of the day's activity, tucked their small hands beneath their heads or gently nestled into the folds of their blankets, sighing softly as their eyelids grew heavier with each passing moment. Their parents or guardians moved quietly about, performing the final, simple rituals of the day, checking that the fire in the hearth had dimmed to a safe glow, ensuring that doors and windows were securely closed against the cool night air, and placing a final glance upon the modest rooms that had seen the ordinary rhythms of another day. Each action, though simple, was carried out with a softness and care that seemed almost meditative, as if each movement were a gentle preparation for the calm descent into sleep. The atmosphere itself seemed to encourage rest. The faint tick of a clock in a distant hallway marked the passing of minutes with a steady, unhurried pace. The light from the hearth, now a quiet ember, cast a soft, warm glow across the wooden beams of the ceiling and the patterned wallpaper that had been chosen for comfort rather than grandeur. Even the furniture, ordinary and familiar, contributed to the sense of calm, its shapes and lines quietly anchoring the room in an environment of gentle security. The air smelled faintly of lavender and beeswax, scents that had lingered from small domestic rituals of cleaning and preparation, and which now mingled with the cooler night air drifting in through slightly open windows. Everything in the room seemed to be settling, to be pausing, as if the household itself were holding its breath in preparation for the stillness to come. In this way, rest in a Victorian home was not sudden or hurried. It arrived gradually, like the soft deepening of twilight into night, a slow, deliberate winding down of energy and attention. The transition from wakefulness to sleep was accompanied by these quiet, rituals, a whispered goodnight, a gentle adjustment of the blankets, the soft closing of shutters, and the faint sound of footsteps retreating down a corridor. Even the body seemed to respond to this cadence, muscles loosening, shoulders sinking, the heart slowing its rhythm as the mind followed the gentle currents of thought that drifted lazily toward dreams. As the evening continued, the household seemed to breathe in a synchronized, silent rhythm. Occasionally, a faint sound would break the silence, a distant cough, the muted rustle of a page turned in a bedside book, or the subtle creak of a floorboard under someone's careful step. But each noise was absorbed into the vast quiet of the night, never loud enough to disturb the slow progression towards sleep. The darkness outside deepened, becoming a velvety curtain that enveloped the house, filtering the world to a few soft shapes and distant, softened lights. Within this subdued realm, the mind found its way to thoughts of simple pleasures, the warmth of a bed, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the gentle passing of another ordinary day. Gradually, the residents of the house would allow their awareness to drift. Eyes closed softly, the weight of the day pressing down in the most ordinary and reassuring way. Each person surrendered to the calm that had been cultivated through the evening. The fire's embers faded further, and the faint scent of smoke and ash mingled with the cooler night air, a quiet reminder of the warmth and protection that had accompanied the household throughout the day. Breaths lengthened, shoulders relaxed, and small, barely perceptible sighs marked the moment when wakefulness began to loosen its hold. In some rooms, the faint sound of a lullaby or a soft hum might carry through the air, almost imperceptible, barely disturbing the tranquility of the night. This subtle music, sometimes from memory, sometimes from gentle repetition, added an extra layer of calm, threading through the quiet with its soothing presence. The rhythm of sleep approached steadily, unhurried, enveloping each person in a gentle, invisible embrace until even the last thoughts of the day had gently faded into the background, leaving only the soft hush of night and the deep, steady cadence of restful breathing. Time itself seemed to move differently in these moments, measured not by the clock, but by the gentle flow of consciousness from wakefulness into dreams. There was no urgency, no sense of loss or gain, only the serene acceptance of the ordinary, of the natural passing of hours from day into night. Each bedroom, each bed, became a small sanctuary, a personal space for rest that was quietly protected and respected. The dim light, the soft fabrics, the familiar arrangement of furniture all conspired to create a sense of calm, a slow descent into the tranquil state that was both restorative and unremarkable in the most comforting way. By the time the night had fully deepened, the house had become a vessel of quiet. Shadows settled into corners, and the faint, almost imperceptible sounds of breathing, small movements, and the occasional turning of a sleeper's body created a delicate, rhythmic harmony. Outside, the moonlight might spill softly across the garden, brushing leaves and flowers with a gentle silver glow, but inside, all was subdued and still. In this environment, rest was complete, slow, and untroubled. Sleep had arrived, naturally, gradually wrapping the household in a cocoon of ordinary, peaceful living, carrying everyone softly through the night without hurry, without disturbance, in the gentle embrace of A Victorian Evening's End.